shoes and walk among the groups of two. It's not ideal, it's just how we feel. It's a shame we're easily amused. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. Cast a stone and get a hardcore view. Catchphrase of the day is that it's true. There's no coffee talk and only one way to know what you do moves me. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. Yeah, I'm not looking for a windswept view. Our change has changed. Nothing's new. Right heart, new song. Mad news. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. If I could know what we'll do wrong, I'd take this smile. The only cure for this forward motion, this smile. The only cure for this forward motion, this smile. The only cure for this forward motion.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Rebellious 1776. My name is Lynn Hurley, and I am here with you to critique, criticize, and fact-check our nation's politicians in real time. We love watching a good congressional hearing around here because we want to know just what those sneaky little politicians are saying, and more importantly, what they're doing with our tax dollars. And if you know someone who would like to know that information as well, please feel free to share the love and share the show with them. We get around best by word of mouth, so please let other people know so we can all watch what these guys are doing. And if you do like talking all things politics, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you always get notified anytime we have a new show. So today, guys, I'm so excited because I have a friend today. I have a friend who's going to watch the hearing with me. And guess what? He's your friend too. All of my chat members, you'll know him. You love him. I'm going to bring him on. It is the one and only Chris Martin, aka Chris. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Looking forward to a good heckle. This
I'm
one's a good
so
one.
excited. I'm so excited. So Chris and I have known each other for I don't even know how many years now. It's been a while.
Long enough. I know your
Yeah.
maiden name.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So long enough that we can't remember. So, and I've always had great conversations with Chris, and we are going to watch a hearing today. But I asked Chris if he wanted to join me because I thought it would be fun to have a friend on with me, and we could discuss with with each other and with everybody in the chat. So we're going to kind of do our normal thing, but it's going to be Chris and I both commenting today, and then after the hearing, it's not a super long one. It's only about, I think it's an hour and a half or so, and then we'll discuss a little afterwards too. But if you guys are watching us live, please do join us in the chat because we always love seeing what you have to say. We'll be including you guys in on the conversation as well. And that should be it, I think, right? Sounds good.
Let's go.
Okay. All right,
I just realized I need to pull up the chat.
Oh, that's okay. Let's see. I think, what's the best way to do this? Nope, I made another one. Let me try it where, why does that look weird? Okay, I think that's better. I'm gonna have us bigger, and they, Congress can be
And
the
they
same
on
size.
top.
That's right. The congressional gods are above us. No. All right, let me pull it up. And then as always, let me know how the sound is, everybody. And Chris, I forgot to tell you this backstage, but you might want to mute when you're not talking because sometimes the sound comes through the microphone, the hearing. So it doesn't make a terrible like feedback, but it just sounds weird. All right. So, but anytime you want to talk, obviously, unmute.
Yeah, I got the earbuds in, so I'm good.
Okay, cool. Perfect. Here we go. And let us know how the sound is, everybody.
Okay, thank you. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on federal statutory and regulatory crimes. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. My opening statement out. There we go. I thank the members who are here this morning. I thank our witnesses who are here, and I thank those in the gallery, both here and on video. Today's hearing is titled Overreach, an examination of federal statutory and regulatory crimes. We could have just as easily called it oversight of Congress, because in many respects, Congress has created the problem that we're here to discuss today. The problem is the number of federal and regulatory crimes has escalated out of control to the point that law-abiding Americans unknowingly commit several crimes every day. According to one study, the average American commits 3 felonies per day, which does not take into account the overwhelming number of misdemeanors or civil violations. In some instances, the laws are so obscure and vague that even law enforcement and federal agencies are unaware that they exist. The United States Code is estimated to contain more than 5,000 crimes today. Just a decade ago, some scholars estimated that these were approximately 4,500 crimes, and the fact that these numbers are just estimates underscores the severity of the problem. According to a study by the Federalist Society, the number of federal criminal offenses increased by 30% between 1980 and 2004. There were 452 new federal criminal offenses enacted between 2000 and 2007, averaging 56.5 new crimes per year. And over the past 3 decades, Congress has been averaging 500 new crimes per decade. And it is ironic, quite frankly, that tomorrow we're going to be considering more crimes in this committee, the entire Committee of Judiciary. We'll be considering several more potential crimes. And keep in mind that the estimated 5,000 criminal laws are not all neatly found in Title 18. They're scattered around the other 49 titles as well. The fact that this is only an estimate means that no one knows exactly how many federal laws subject U.S. citizens to criminal sanction. That includes Congress, the Department of Justice, and other federal agencies responsible for enforcing those laws, let alone your ordinary American. How did we get here? After all, our founding fathers first enumerated federal crimes in the Crimes Act of 1790. That act enumerated 23 federal crimes and establish the punishments for those crimes. Among other crimes, the Crimes Act of 1790 established federal crimes for treason, piracy, and
23. Wait till you guys hear how many
counterfeiting.
we have now.
While the legislation did establish some crimes against the person, such as murder, and crimes against property, such as larceny, the federal jurisdiction of those crimes was limited to federal property and territories. Over the past century, Congress has lost its way. Instead of methodically and deliberatively crafting a common sense criminal code, Congress acted in a knee-jerk reaction to every minor and major crisis. In doing so, Congress believed that there always had to be a federal response to every headline and breaking news story. In fact, it was even, sometimes I get off script, sorry about that, but I mean, if you think about it, if you look in the 50s, you will see that there was a popular radio show, there was popular newspaper articles that said there ought to be a law. So if you've got the Reader's Digest, when I was a kid and you looked at it, every month or two, there was some outrageous conduct, and the response was there ought to be a law. And of course, Congress responded and made many laws, some of them criminal in nature. One academic has aptly noted as it was the spate of bank robberies by John Dillinger in the 1930s that provoked passage of the federal bank robbery statute, the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby about the same time that caused passage of the federal statute on kidnapping, the assassination of President Kennedy in the early 1960s that prompted the statute on presidential assassination, and the killing of Senator Robert Kennedy in the late 60s that resulted in the passage of a statute finally making it a federal crime to kill a member of Congress. More recently, we saw the enactment of Sarbanes-Oxley in response to the Enron scandal. All of us on this dais have witnessed this phenomenon among our colleagues. Some have termed this
All should have already been common sense.
accumulation approach to offenses, whereby Congress has simply accumulated new offenses for 200
What was
years or so
that?
with little examination or reformulation of existing
All these
offenses,
laws
which
should
has
have already
resulted
been
in
common
serious overlaps
sense.
in
Murder
coverage and
is already a
irrationalities
capital
among
crime
offense-
under common law and every other law.
offense
So why
penalties, which create new possibilities
special
for
law
disparity in treatment for double punishment
for
the
special
same crime or
categories?
evil.
Yeah,
This leads to absurdities.
right. And I think that's
For
the
example,
problem
the
we
Code
were
of
at
Federal
now.
Regulations
We talked
makes it a
about it
federal crime to try
later,
to
where
sell
I
a
think you said
quarantine
we have
zebra while
over,
it is still in
I
quarantine.
can't remember, if
In another
5,000
example,
crimes on the books.
16 U.S.C. sections
And
703
a
About
lot of that
4,500.
seems,
section
yeah,
20.91A
that's
make it a
crazy
federal
though.
crime to offer
So,
to
and a
buy
lot of it
swan
seems
feathers
like,
for use in making a
it's
woman's hat. According to one
crimes
scholar, the
that are
proliferation of crimes makes
in
it
one way or
extraordinarily
another
difficult to
already on
ferret
the
out the
books.
law
They've
applicable
just
to a
like
particular factual
tweaked it
situation.
slightly. And
It also creates
been
unfairness
crimes.
within federal law, which provides federal prosecutors with a near limitless menu to pursue criminal defendants. And when Congress isn't creating new criminal code provisions, it is passing laws that allow unelected bureaucrats to write regulations that carry civil and criminal penalties. What we all too often forget is that many of the problems we seek to solve are actually state and local issues. Under the federal system, the U.S. Supreme Court has observed that, quote, states possess primary authority for defining and enforcing the criminal law, close quote. And, quote, our national government is one of delegated powers alone. Under our federal system, the administration of criminal justice rests with the states, except as Congress, acting within the scope of those delegated powers, has created offenses against the United States, close quote. But Congress is not relented and continues to add federal crimes to our federal code. Congress can and should restrain from over-legislating on issues that should be left to state and local governments. This hearing is an opportunity to examine potential legislation introduced in past Congresses to restrict federal agencies' ability to criminalize conduct that a reasonable person would consider lawful. We have wonderful, excellent, expert witnesses today, and I've read every one of your testimonies that you have submitted, and I think it is so important. I look forward to hearing what you have to say today. One of you has said, every criminal record comes with a host of consequences that we rarely think about. And I'm talking about the results of the abundance of criminal offenses, but also with what happens to those who are charged and even convicted. These collateral consequences are legal and regulatory restrictions that limit or prohibit people convicted of crimes from accessing employment, business and occupational licensing, housing, voting, education, and other opportunities. Another of you has said the sheer quantity of federal regulation on the books today would require about 3 years to read if reading was your full-time job. Another of you said, and you quoted James Madison, I appreciated this from Federalist 62, "It will be of little avail to the people if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. The Congressional Research Service, Justice Department, and the ABA have all tried and failed to count the federal criminal laws, but we believe there may be around 4,000 existing federal criminal laws, but even this massive number is dwarfed by incredibly high estimates that Americans are subjected to about 300,000 federal regulatory offenses." And also, the note that prosecutions, even politically inspired ones, are protected under a veil of legitimacy because of the overabundance of these criminal laws that Congress keeps putting into place. Another pointed out that 50% of laws related to nonviolent and non-drug offenses lacked a mens rea requirement, which is perhaps one of the easiest solutions we could put into effect immediately, was a mens rea requirement. I look forward to hearing from each of our
So
witnesses.
mens rea, for anyone who doesn't
And,
know, is basically like
with
your
that,
state of
I
mind,
yield
your intent,
back
your
and
intent to commit the
recognize
crime.
the distinguished ranking member, Ms. Jackson Lee, for her opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. This is more
Oh
than
boy,
a unique
one of my
moment in
favorites.
history. We're having a hearing on the overproliferation of the potential and possibility of over-federalization of laws. And we have both the responsibility to keep this nation safe and the responsibility to ensure that laws have common sense and that the common sense is used effectively to
Anytime
ensure
a Congress member says common
that we have
sense,
good governance.
it always
And I think
like,
that's what we all
like
want
is a
to
red flag
see
for
and
me.
hear. So I'm delighted to open with you the hearing on overreach and examination of federal statutory and regulatory crimes this morning on April 30th. Could not open these hearings without taking special note of the conditions of this nation around the world when America's youth are speaking out in loud voices, asking for guidance and help and assistance and trying to seek direction so that the some of the oldest laws that are grounded in our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, are adhered to and respected. And that is the respect for people's differences and the respect for people's words, and as well, the respect for people's feelings. We cannot have a nation of laws, of which I believe is our greatest strength, without understanding the passion for both our laws and the land that we love. We pledge allegiance to the flag. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman, for that, because it gives us the grounding of this hearing. So thank you, Chairman Biggs, for convening this hearing to discuss the very real problem of overcriminalization. For more than a decade, the overcriminalization of federal criminal law has been identified as a significant issue in our justice system. In 2014, the Congressional Research Service identified 435 offenses carrying criminal penalties that were created between 2008 and 2013. That means Congress created nearly 90 new criminal offenses each year during that 5-year period. This trend of expanding the scope of federal criminal statutes has resulted in an excess of ambiguous and broadly defined offenses, leading to confusion among citizens and even legal professionals. The potential for individuals to unknowingly commit a crime due to the complexity and sheer volume of federal laws not only undermines the principles of justice and fairness, but also erodes public trust in the legal system. Additionally, the proliferation of federal criminal laws has led to instances where federal where individuals, particularly in marginalized communities, are unfairly targeted, prosecuted, and incarcerated for minor offenses that do not warrant such harsh punishment. This not only perpetuates social inequalities, but also strains already overburdened prison system. It is crucial for Congress to re-examine and streamline the federal criminal statutes to ensure that these laws are proportionate, clear, serve the federal interest, and promote the interests of justice and fairness. By focusing on meaningful and necessary criminal legislation, we can prevent further overcriminalization and safeguard the integrity of our legal system. Since the number of existing federal regulations has mushroomed to more than roughly 300,000, we should also consider whether the criminalization of conduct that could be better addressed through civil means necessarily burdens the criminal justice system. However, we must also recognize the importance of these regulations, that they are sometimes criminalized for good reason, and that the criminal penalties often exist within a system that begins with administrative and civil tools that promote compliance and correction. Let us not forget that the purpose of prosecuting, punishing, and deterring future bad actors is to protect us from the harms contemplated by the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, and the Occupational Safety and Health Act. For instance, following an explosion at British Petroleum's Texas City refinery that killed 15 workers and injured another 180, BP pled guilty to knowing the violations of the Clean Air Act for its actions that led to the explosion, and paid a $50 million criminal fine, the largest ever at the time under the CAA. An examination of the company's safety record showed that Texas City was not an isolated occurrence, as the corporate culture had come to prioritize revenue over safety and maintenance. We have to learn, I believe, to match the punishment with the crime, of course, but we must also learn to understand the volume of criminalization and overcriminalization, and we must learn to work through the crisis of overcriminalization. I look forward to hearing from our very astute witnesses today and engaging in what I hope will be a productive conversation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reserve, but I will reserve and yield at the same time.
The gentlelady yields back. I understand that
The chairman is,
the ranking
arriving.
member is, I think, arriving. And
we're checking, yes. I think he would like to come, so you. He's walking in.
I see him.
So the word of the day today is criminalization. Every time a congressman says it, you have to take a sip.
Absolutely. Luckily, it's not alcoholic, so at least not on my end. So I have a feeling you'd be very drunk if it was.
It's Chez Buble on my end.
The chair recognizes ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing. Roughly a decade ago, we learned through this committee's bipartisan overcriminalization task force, of which I was a member, that there are simply too many federal criminal laws on the books, that their reach is often too broad, and that too many individuals are jailed for far too long because of them. For too long, Congress, under both parties, has created new offenses or expanded existing laws in response to a national crisis, daily headlines, or highly publicized tragedies, often federalizing crimes traditionally prosecuted by the states, without inquiry into whether the federal government should be involved at all. Instead of playing politics and trying to prove who is toughest on crime, we should be doing more to prevent crime before it even happens. For instance, we could address substance abuse and mental health disorders, end the school to prison pipeline, cut off the iron pipeline that funnels guns into major cities like New York and Philadelphia, or provide real solutions for the unhoused. Nonetheless, I am pleased that we have the opportunity to tackle the important subject of overcriminalization today, which has long been recognized as a major contributing factor to both mass incarceration and overpolicing in America. But let's be clear, this hearing should not be about Donald Trump or about the January 6th rioters. Courts will decide whether they were properly charged, nor should it serve as a platform to undermine the federal regulations that keep us, our constituents, and our communities safe. While overcriminalization in the regulatory context is certainly cause for concern, we should remember that regulations ensure that we breathe clean air, drink clean water, consume safe food and medicines, and that our loved ones work in safe environments. This hearing should be about the countless individuals, mostly Black, brown, and poor, who for decades have borne the brunt of the overuse and abuse of criminal law in the federal system. As the number of federal criminal statutes has ballooned, overcriminalization has had wide-ranging negative impacts on individuals who are at a social or economic disadvantage, whether by exploiting already existing disparities in access to legal resources, by leading to the increased surveillance and targeting of minority communities by law enforcement, or by driving mass incarceration. The Department of Justice, and particularly the Bureau of Prisons, continues to grapple with the costs of overcriminalization and mass incarceration, both fiscally and with respect to other resources such as manpower. That is why Congress should be working together to craft legislation that ensures that the resources of federal agencies, federal law enforcement, and federal courts are used most effectively and not wasted on the enforcement of crimes that are better handled by the states. If we are to have a real discussion about the problems associated with overcriminalization and solutions, we must first recognize the many forms that overcriminalization takes in the federal criminal justice system. It occurs most frequently through federalizing crimes traditionally reserved for the states, adopting duplicative and overlapping statutes, enacting vague or broad criminal statutes, and enacting criminal statutes that fail to set meaningful mens rea standards. Whether Republican or Democrat, we should all agree that the resulting broad expansion of federal criminal law undermines any effort to provide just and proportionate punishment for criminal conduct and lessens the legitimacy of the criminal justice system overall. It is vitally important that we rein in the growth of the federal criminal code and ask whether all of the laws on the books are truly necessary and whether they are accomplishing what should be their ultimate goal, the protection of the public safety. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and before I yield back the balance of my time, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a written statement from Michael P. Heiskell, President of the National Association of Criminal Defense, an organization that has worked for more than a decade on the issue of overcriminalization.
Without objection.
And now I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Appreciate that. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses. We have Patrick Pertil, who serves as the Director of Legislative Affairs at Faith and Freedom Coalition and is the Charles Evans Hughes Lecturer in Politics at Colgate University. Previously, he practiced law advising corporations on formation, transactions, corporate governance, and compliance issues. And in the George W. Bush administration, he spent 3 years as Special Assistant to Deputy Attorney General, where he served on the Serious and Violent Offender Reentry Initiative Working Group. Well, thank you for being with us today, Mr. Pertil. Dr. Patrick McLaughlin. Dr. McLaughlin is Director of Policy and Analytics and a Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. His research focuses primarily on regulations and the regulatory process. Dr. McLaughlin has authored more than a dozen peer-reviewed studies on topics such as regulatory economics, administrative law, industrial organization, and international trade. Thank you for being with us, Doctor. Mr. Brett Tolman. Mr. Tolman is the founder of the Tolman Group, a public policy law firm that works to hold federal, state, and local governments accountable and advance transparency. He previously served as the United States Attorney for the District of Utah and has testified before Congress multiple times on criminal justice issues, including the First Step Act. Thank you, Mr. Tolman, for being here. Ms. Bianca Tylik, did I say that right? Okay, thank you. Ms. Tylik is the founder and executive director of Worth Rises, a nonprofit organization that advocates for reform in the criminal justice system. She has previously worked at the Brennan Center for Justice and the ACLU and co-founded College Way, a program that worked to prepare students in Rikers Island to pursue higher education upon their release. Thank you for being with us, Ms. Tylik. We welcome all of our witnesses, and we will begin by swearing you in. If you would each please rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witness has answered, each of the witnesses has answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and I will, if you get close, I'll probably tap like this a little bit. Not trying to break your flow, but just trying to let you know that you're nearing the end of your time. I mean, your time for testimony. You might have all the time in the world. I don't know, but that's.
I think this would be a little bit more of a better.
So with that, Mr. Head, you may.
It would be a little more what?
Mr. Head.
A little bit more obvious
Yes,
than
you may proceed.
three gentle taps.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, Madam Ranking Member, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on the topic of
But don't they have the light system
its
where it
impact
goes
on
from
our
green
criminal
to
justice
yellow to
system
red?
and its impact on the rule of law. I commend the
On
committee
whose end,
for
my end or
examining this
their end?
important but often overlooked issue.
I think they both
The
have
power
it,
to
the
punish
witnesses and
is
the
greatest
Congress
domestic
people.
power that the government has, the ability to take life,
They're pretty
liberty,
separate.
property.
Maybe
um,
Congress has like a
And as
clock.
government continues to grow exponentially, the number of acts and beliefs that it prohibits has continued to grow as well. The overcriminalization, the proliferation of laws they're often vague or ambiguous terms. They expand the scope of criminal behavior beyond reasonable limits. This proliferation has resulted in a regime of statutes that criminalize conduct previously considered innocuous or non-criminal. Consequently, individuals, including those with no intent to break the law, find themselves ensnared in a complex web of statutes and regulations that are difficult, if not possible, to navigate. It's illuminating to remember that at common law, there were only 9 major felonies: murder, robbery, arson, rape, for example, and various misdemeanors. And our Constitution itself only specified 3 felonies within the body of the document, although, as the chairman pointed out, one of the first acts of Congress was to create another 23, I believe it was. Certainly a number that was comprehensible. But today we've got more than 5,000 federal crimes, and there are so many rules and regulations with criminal consequence that no one is able to count them. A complete and systematic effort to count stopped somewhere just north of 300,000, including the federal regulations. And this is one of the chief reasons that 1 in 3 Americans today,
And according to
has a
Nancy
criminal record of
Pelosi
some sort.
and friends,
And that many Americans,
the
frankly, have lost
orange
faith
former
and trust
president
in the
has committed
impartiality of the
every
justice
last one of
system
those
and in the equal application
5,000 crimes.
of our laws. It can't be overstated how
Absolutely, and I think he's
dangerous
created it.
this loss of faith
well.
and trust in the
Sure, there
justice
will be
system
new
is for a
ones that they
democratic
create
republic.
just for him.
So why is
In
this
fact,
important?
Alvin Bragg is
I think
kind of
that
doing that.
overcriminalization is important for several key
Well, when we
reasons.
started,
First is that it
the
enables
chair
the
had said, what,
proliferation of criminal laws tilts the playing
4,600?
field too
Now
far in
we
favor
have
of the
our witness
prosecutor.
saying 5,000. I think
And
those are the
it's
ones that got
effectively
created because of the
undermined
last
the Sixth
impeachment.
Amendment right to a jury trial.
Yeah.
According to the American Bar Association, 98% of criminal cases in federal court end with a plea. And there's substantial evidence that innocent people are coerced into guilty pleas because of the power that the prosecutors have over them. Now, I should pause for a moment to say that I think prosecutors are trying to do a good job. They're an integral part of our system in protecting public safety. So I don't mean this to be an overt attack on them. I think that this is the nature of the problem when you have these many criminal statutes. You're going to have this happen. And too many laws make overcharging or charge stacking one of the most common tools used by federal prosecutors, which is why trials have become essentially just rare artifacts. And overcharging can be used not only to force a plea deal, but it can also, if you do decide to exercise your Sixth Amendment right and go to trial, overcharging also can influence the jury into thinking that, well, there's so many charges, one of these must be one of these
Hmm.
must be accurate. So you
Who
can
does that
see
remind you
situations
of?
where
Huh.
defendants are
Someone
acquitted on
stacked
a
a lot
number
of
of charges,
again.
but sometimes juries
Yeah,
feel like they
keep
have to
finger
come
on
back
it.
with a guilty charge on something just because there were so many charges to be
Other
held.
crimes and misdemeanors.
And so many criminal laws make it impossible for an ordinary citizen, or probably
It's
anyone
crazy
for that
when you
matter,
look
as
at
you noted, that it
the
would
Trump,
take 3
even the
years
Trump
to
trial that's
simply
going on
read
right now,
through
right? They're charging him the same,
all
the
of the criminal
same
statutes and
charge,
regulations on the books
like
today.
35
That means that
different
ordinary
times.
citizens
They charge
can't
each
actually know
instance
what the
of
law
it.
is.
And that could be
The legal maxim used to be
invoice
that
for, like,
ignorance of the law is no
or if you
excuse.
enter
And this
in
made
the law
sense when we
any
had
kind of
9 felonies in
invoice,
common law.
each of those is
And those
individual.
felonies were
So when
inherently
people say, oh, there's
blameworthy.
91
You don't
indictments
need
against
to,
him.
everyone understands that
Because
murder
they're
is
just
wrong.
stacking them
You
up
don't
one
need
after
to
the other
know
instead
that
of just
someone
charging
passed a
him.
statute
Or
criminalizing
we don't
murder
even
to
know
know
what
that it
they're
is wrong. They were
exactly
inherently
charging him
blameworthy
with, because they're sort of making it up.
offenses.
But
But if a free
this,
citizen
yeah,
can't
exactly
be
what this guy
certain that
is
they're
talking
in
about, just
compliance
stacking
with the
charges on
law,
top of
the
charges.
problem is with the overly complicated legal regime. It's not with the citizenry. It's because we're criminalizing
And see, Purtell just
actions
made
and
a really good
beliefs
comment
that are
there.
not
And
inherently
it goes
blameworthy.
into where another problem with this
And when you add this
overcharging
to
is an issue
the way
is,
that we go about charging
and
you
where plea
and
deals are
indicting,
encouraged,
New York
is
Judge
because you
Saul
have such a
Wapler
stack
famously observed years ago
of
that if a district
charges
attorney
that takes
wanted a
time
grand
to
jury,
formulate those
he would indict him in a
prosecutions.
sandwich.
And so
And the
that
simple truth
person,
is
unless
that the
they're
mass
able
of
to
federal
post
criminal
bail
laws
and
and
bond,
regulations
and
makes
bail
this
and bond is
easier. It
assessed
makes
on how
every
many
American
charges you have,
potential
it's very
criminal.
easy for someone to
Rather
rack
than
up a
seeing a
felony or
crime
two
and then
and to be
investigating
held
to find
over
the
$1
perpetrator,
million worth of
staggering labyrinth of
reduced
criminal
bond.
statutes and regulations
That's
means
in
you can
states that are
identify
allowed
an
to reduce
individual
it.
for prosecution
They're not
and
going to
dig
be able to
until you
bond
find
out.
some rule book
And
authority.
so they're stuck in the county lockup or
So
wherever
you're over your
until
So I'm sorry.
their trial
I will-
date comes
I
up
will
on
stop there,
docket.
but
And a lot of these
the
folks
only
will
other thing I would say
go
is
for
you
a
did
plea
mention
deal
this
just to
comes
get
with
their ass,
a host
pardon
of
me, their
collateral consequences
butts out of
that make
jail
it the real danger and why I
altogether.
think it is important
And
what you're doing here
that's
today
another
is
hazard
the
of
real
all of
danger is that
this.
it undermines the public confidence in
Yeah,
the fair
absolutely.
application
Unless you're in
of
New
law.
York City,
And
then
that
they
is
don't put you on
truly a
jail for
dangerous
just about anything.
situation to be in. So I commend you.
Unless you're a white male,
Thank
then
you,
you're
Mr.
probably
Crypto.
screwed.
And
Other
now,
than that,
I recognize.
this ain't
Oh,
what you
I
know these
jaywalk.
days.
If I jaywalk in New York City, I'm going straight to the
Biggs,
gallows on
Ranking
Rikers
Member
Island.
Mather,
They're going to
Ranking
string
Member
me up
Jackson
off
Lee,
the Brooklyn
Yeah.
Bridge.
members of the committee. I'm Patrick McLaughlin, a senior research
Sure.
fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. The Mercatus Center is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research center dedicated to bridging the gap between academic ideas and real-world problems. Thanks again for inviting me here to testify today. For more than a decade, I specialize in using computer algorithms to quantify various aspects of accumulated laws and regulations. I learned early on in my career that it would be impossible for any human to read the entirety of federal laws and regulations, so I devised computational solutions instead. Some of my work on regulatory accumulation has demonstrated how the buildup of rules over time significantly slows economic growth. But I have also studied the accumulation of crimes as defined in the US Code. And on that topic, I have three main points today. First, there has been a significant increase in the number of federal criminal statutes and regulations over the past 3 decades. Second, the expansion of federal criminal laws over the past few decades has been linked to an increase in federal incarceration rates. Third, the haphazard expansion of federal crimes may duplicate state laws or existing federal laws, resulting in redundant crimes. A few years ago, I worked on a project that used some of these advanced computer algorithms to create an inventory of criminal laws within the US Code. Using a carefully cultivated set of search terms, such as the phrases imprisoned for not more than or shall be guilty of, we were able to estimate not only how many crimes Congress has written into the US Code as of 2019, but also how that number has changed over time. Our work revealed a significant increase in the number of federal criminal statutes over the past 3 decades. We estimated that 3,825 federal crimes were on the books as of 1994. By the year 2019, that number had increased by more than a third to 5,199. Interestingly, more than half of the total growth in that entire 22-year period that we studied occurred between 1994 and 1996. This matched our expectations because a tough on crime agenda played a significant part in politics in the 1980s through the mid-1990s. I recently ran the same algorithm on the Code of Federal Regulations to estimate the crimes that are defined in federal regulations. I estimate that an additional 2,157 to 2,876 crimes are defined in similar ways as in the US Code within the Code of Federal Regulations as of 2023. Now, the number 300,000 has been also used in this hearing, and I will just point out that I'm using the same algorithms to look for these search terms that were devised by looking through the statutes and applying it to the CFR, to the regulations. So my number is probably a floor, probably not the ceiling. But anyway, that means the total number of crimes defined across federal laws, including both statutes and regulations, likely falls at least in the 7,000 to 8,000 range. Now, a longstanding criticism of the haphazard expansion of federal crimes is that new federal criminal laws may duplicate state laws or existing federal laws in a patchwork of redundant crimes. This duplication has a number of downsides. It erodes principles of federalism by having federal authorities police conduct that has been traditionally viewed as better left to state and local governments. This duplication also dilutes political accountability because the public is not able to discern who has primary authority for addressing a particular crime or whom to blame if a crime is not addressed. And finally, duplicative federal crimes give prosecutors wide latitude to charge different people committing the same offenses with different crimes, opening the door for bias to factor into charging decisions. The US has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, and that rate seems obviously linked to the number of crimes defined in law. The number of federal prison inmates alone has risen by 500% since 1980. Any action by Congress to reduce the number of duplicative or otherwise undesirable crimes could only serve to reduce that incarceration rate. The accumulation of laws and regulations and the crimes that are defined within them should not be assumed to be harmless. The US needs legislative reforms to simplify federal laws and regulations, period. Such reforms could involve reducing the number of federal crimes, clarifying the language of statutes, and considering decriminalization or the use of civil penalties for certain offenses to alleviate the burden on the criminal justice system. Reforms like these are crucial to ensuring that laws are fair, just, and proportionate to the behaviors they aim to regulate, safeguarding against the negative consequences of overcriminalization. Thank you again for inviting me here today to discuss this important topic.
Thank you, Dr. McLaughlin. And Ms. Tylick, we recognize you now for your 5 minutes. You might need to hit that microphone button, please. Thank
Sorry.
you.
There we go. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and members of the committee. I am Bianca Tylick, Executive Director of Worth Rises, a national organization working to remove the financial incentives to incarcerate people. I'm also a crime victim, and I've had a loved one who's been murdered. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the issue of overcriminalization. We all want safe and thriving communities, and we can get there by working together. While the others on this panel are and will continue to speak about some of the legal specifics of overreach in the criminal code, I will cover which I also cover in my written testimony, I will focus my comments today on the impact that federal overcriminalization has on the American people. To start, any discussion of overcriminalization at the federal level must reflect on the significant influence it has over state policies, especially when funding is attached. This was the case throughout the 1990s and 2000s when Congress provided federal funding for prison construction to states that enacted tough and crime laws like mandatory minimums. Unfortunately, today, federal programs like civil asset forfeiture continue to root the issue of federal overcriminalization in state and local budgetary policy. As a result of overcriminalization at the federal and state level, someone is arrested every 3 seconds in the United States. This amounts to 10.5 million arrests annually, with over 80% for low-level offenses like drugs and disorderly conduct. Those arrested are disproportionately Black and brown and low-income people, leading to the over-incarceration and over-surveillance of these communities. Core to the overcriminalization crisis is that even committing a minor offense can impart a lifetime of negative consequences. A simple arrest can lead to job loss, while a criminal conviction, and worse yet, incarceration, can threaten the financial stability and economic mobility of the person convicted and their family for years, even generations to come. Consider that roughly 57% of people in federal prison are the parents of minor children, and more than half were the primary breadwinners for their families before they were incarcerated. Though most incarcerated people in prison work, Their penny wages prevent them from sending anything home. So unsurprisingly, about half of families with an incarcerated loved one struggle to make ends meet. And it's not just the loss of income at issue, but families end up with new egregious expenses for basic food and hygiene products and communication services for their incarcerated loved ones. To make matters worse, funds deposited by families for their incarcerated loved ones can be garnished for court fines and fees. The Federal Bureau of Prisons recently sought to garnish as much as 75% of what families deposited. Thankfully, Congress has recently created some relief. For decades, 1 in 3 families with an incarcerated loved one has gone into debt trying to stay connected over expensive calls. Some cut off contact unable to afford it, which is detrimental to correctional officers and public safety, with studies repeatedly showing that when incarcerated people are connected to their support systems, facility violence decreases and reentry success increases. But Congress passed the Martha Wright Reed Just and Reasonable Communications Act to increase regulation of the prison telecom industry and made all calls free in federal prisons through the CARES Act, a policy I urge Congress to implement permanently. For too long, women like Martha Wright Reed, who skipped medication to afford calls with her grandson in federal prison, have carried the cost of overcriminalization. Indeed, over 80% of carceral costs, like the cost of calls, commissary, and court fees, are borne by women, largely Black and brown women. See, the issue of overcriminalization is not just about criminal justice. It's about gender equity, children's health, family unity, economic justice, and more that we don't have the time to talk about today, like privacy rights and regressive taxes. The intersection of these issues, all or one of which may matter to you, should bring us collectively to the table to address them. And importantly, overcriminalization does not just impact those arrested and sentenced, but all of us. Overcriminalization dramatically hinders public safety by exacerbating the social conditions that lead to crime in the first place. But in doing so, it lines the pockets of the $80 billion niche prison industry with a deep financial interest in the overcriminalization of Americans. In fact, major players in the prison industry have plainly stated that declining crime rates, which improve our safety, hurt their business. An industry so offensive that it cannot advertise uses public fear-mongering to hide its interests and boost its business. A huge reason for overcriminalization, the prison industry is an impediment to passing smart policies that promote safety, freedom, and justice, and we must put an end to it. In closing, I would be remiss not to mention that the roots of overcriminalization and even the prison industry date back to the exception in the 13th Amendment, which gave way for the passage of Black codes during the Reconstruction era that applied only to newly freed Black people and criminalized minor offenses like vagrancy to feed the brutal practice of convict leasing by which states leased incarcerated people to private businesses. More than a century later, slavery is still legal as criminal punishment.
Your time's expired.
Okay, I have 2
Wrap it
sentences.
up. Okay, all right.
More than a century later, slavery is still legal as criminal punishment, and we are still over-criminalizing minor offenses.
The melodrama. Even my computer doesn't like her. Hold on a second. Why did it go back all the way? That's weird. Let me get to the end.
And localities to do the same. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Ms. Tyler, for being here.
Even my computer got
This is Mr. Tolman for his 5 minutes.
Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member Nadler, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. I am a former United States Attorney for the District of Utah, appointed by George Bush in 2006. Today, however, I serve as the Executive Director of Right on Crime, a national criminal justice campaign focusing on conservative, data-driven solutions to reduce crime, restore victims, reform offenders, and lower taxpayer costs. As U.S. Attorney, I remember a plaque in the halls of justice that read, "The hallmark of fairness in the administration of justice is consistency." And yet this principle can be easily lost when there are too many federal criminal laws to keep track of, let alone understand. James Madison warned of this issue in Federalist Paper 62, writing, "It will be of little avail to the people if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read or so incoherent that they cannot be understood." Madison was on to something. because we have no idea how many crimes are on the books, as many have commented today. Nobody really knows the number of crimes. What we do know is that
Which is why
overcriminalization
there is
offends
so
both
much
sides of the aisle
duplication.
and is antithetical to our nation's founding principles.
Yeah, that's great.
Criminal laws now cover
Like,
so many
this is
facets of our everyday
how
lives
many
that the
laws
government
on the
can
books is
target
great.
citizens with impunity. Many of these crimes are easy to prosecute because many lack mens rea, the mens rea element. To commit a crime, you have to do it and you have to mean to do it, or at least know that it could happen. But often mental state requirements are abandoned, allowing the government to prove its case by a person's actions alone. This isn't how our criminal laws are meant to function. The bloated administrative state contributes greatly to overcriminalization. Faceless bureaucrats have made thousands of activities illegal, but they don't have to justify their decisions to the voter. Lastly, overcriminalization encroaches on state prosecution powers. When Congress oversteps into the traditionally state-held criminal prosecution space, state offenses can be unnecessarily replicated, making everything a crime and everyone a potential criminal. Overcriminalization is problematic in normal times, but we're living in unique time with political pressures taking precedent over the rule of law. I've worked in the criminal justice system for over 25 years and cannot believe how the current DOJ is choosing to throw away the rule of law to attack political enemies. When I was U.S. Attorney, I was determined to prosecute both Republicans or Democrats alike, so far as the facts and law supported the charges. But times have changed. Now federal prosecutors use their massive discretion and the overabundance of applicable laws to target whomever they choose. Even state prosecutors have jumped on the bandwagon, with the most relevant example being the targeted prosecution of President Trump by DA Alvin Bragg. This case didn't have enough evidence to support a legitimate federal charge, but prosecutors seeking to gain political points have chosen to target political enemy number one. Even for Democrats, this should be concerning, because if it's Donald Trump today, it could be you tomorrow. And prosecutions, even politically motivated ones, have the guise
Very
of
good
legitimacy
point.
and are difficult to undercut or question. Partner this with our overcriminalization problem, and it's easy to see how power can be abused. Justice Scalia pinpointed this issue almost 30 years ago, warning that prosecutors, if left to their own devices, can pick people they think they should get rather than cases that need to be prosecuted. And with there being thousands of crimes to choose from, a prosecutor can target a man and then search the books to pin an offense on him. This should scare every member of this committee. My written testimony goes into more detail on how to avoid and solve this problem, but I'll quickly summarize some suggestions. First, Congress should practice restraint in creating more federal criminal laws. Decriminalization should be as equally important. But if Congress does pen a new criminal statute, it must ensure that it has a mens rea element. Also, this committee can revive broader mens rea reform by considering bills that attach a default mens rea to every statutory and regulatory offense. Next, Congress can conduct robust oversight. President Trump issued an executive order that told agencies to specify
He just
mens rea
committed 5
standards and
felonies
make
right there.
regulatory crimes understandable. President Biden undid this executive order.
I
Why?
think I've
This
committed at
committee
least 10
can get
just
to the
sitting
bottom
there.
of that and urge the administration to take overcriminalization seriously. In a similar vein, agencies' powers must be reined in. The fourth branch shouldn't be able to impose weighty criminal sanctions on Americans. This power belongs to the people's representatives. Overcriminalization threatens our public safety,
That's an
individual liberties, and the fair
ATF
administration
felony
of
he just
justice.
said right there.
Consistent application of the law is a cornerstone of our criminal justice system, and addressing our
I think we should
overcriminalization is
go
a
back to the
critical
like
step to
Wild West
achieving this
days.
goal. I appreciate your time and look forward to any questions you may have.
Civic justice.
Thank you, Mr. Tolman. And we appreciate all of the statements that you've given to us. And now, Chair recognizes Mr. Tiffany, the gentleman from Wisconsin, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you use the term crisis in your opening remarks. Everything in America is a crisis today, and when everything's a crisis, nothing is. And it's really unfortunate that the word gets used the way it does, especially to drive public policy. Mr. Tolman, it's attributed to one of the worst despots in the history of the world, Joseph Stalin. Show me the man, and I will show you.
I thought that was Trump.
What role do federal agencies play in the complication of the criminal code through their regulations?
Well, it's fascinating to me that three entities, the ABA, the Department of Justice, and the research agencies, all attempted to identify the number of regulations that have criminal penalties, and it is an abdication, but it's of Congress to let anybody pass a criminal law. But I don't necessarily blame Congress on this. I think it is the executive branches seeking to expand that regulatory power, and we're bloating these
Fun
agencies
fact,
with
law
both
enforcement
power
agencies
and then
are
no
not for the
accountability.
judicial. They
Are
are an
there
extension of the
Any federal
executive
agencies,
branch.
are there any you name in particular that have
That is
exceeded their
correct.
authority more than others that
Only
are
courts are
repeat
the
offenders?
branch, which is really
Well,
interesting.
you certainly have,
And the
you know,
ATF.
history has proven the IRS
DOJ
has
is
gone
under the
from not a
control
single
of
agent
Joe
carrying a
Biden.
firearm to
People don't
now
realize.
most agents carrying firearms. You know, what is the evolution of that? The evolution is a regulatory body becoming a police body. And so we could go down the list of all the acronyms that are now moving from a regulatory body to a policing agency.
Ms. Tylek, are you saying in your testimony that slavery still exists in America?
Excuse me. Yes, slavery is actually still legal in America. It's not just only that it exists in practice, but according to the 13th Amendment, there's an exception clause that says except as punishment for a crime, which means, you know, by law, slavery is still allowed.
Have you noticed, is there, in the work that you've done, is there a greater impact with this, call it overcriminalization? Is there a greater impact on men versus women?
For sure. The 92% of the prison population is
Talking to you
men.
here
So
at the
undoubtedly,
congressional
there's an
hearing.
impact
Sure.
from incarceration specifically, and most of those arrested are also men. However, women are carrying in many ways the actual cost of incarceration, literally fiscally. 87% of the cost of, for example, phone calls and visits and court fees are actually covered by women.
Mr. Pirtle, do you accept that this has had a greater impact on men than women with this overcriminalization?
I do think that that is the case, and I do think the prison population bears that out.
Can you give a couple examples or give me something briefly that causes you to say that, other than the statistic 92%?
It would cause me to say that it's had overcriminalization has had a greater impact on men than women.
Yes.
Really, I would kind of lean in on, unless you're saying that there's a higher degree of criminality between one sex or the other. I would think that there's probably.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that the prison
aren't there
population
plenty of
probably does
studies
some of
that
that.
show that men are more likely to commit crime than
Mr.
women?
McLaughlin,
Not to
have
say that
any
women
recent
don't.
Supreme Court decisions of the last decade been
I would
helpful
disagree.
in this? If you believe
I
there's
think
overcriminalization,
that
have there been any
historically
Supreme Court decisions
there's
that have
been more of a
helpful in
hesitation
reining that
to
in?
prosecute women or even to arrest female offenders
One case
than there
comes
is
to
for
mind,
male
but keep in
offenders,
mind, I'm
because
an
male
economist, not an
offenders,
attorney,
males in
but
general,
I
are
do
perceived to be
recall,
the more
I have
dominant,
jotted
aggressive
down the name of the
person,
case,
whereas
Yates versus United
females
States,
are,
where
they've got the motherly
a
role, they've got all
crime
this other
created by the
stuff. You see this
Sarbanes-Oxley
even in
Act
civil
was applied in
court
the case
with
of a
child
fishing
custody
boat.
battles. Most of the time,
The fisher, the
many
captain of the
states
boat
will
destroyed
favor the
evidence
mother, even
of
though
keeping
she's
a
completely
fish that was
unfit
too
and
small to keep,
probably
and he was
risks
prosecuted under the
children more than the
Sarbanes-Oxley
father,
Act.
but because of the
That comes to
feminine
mind as an example of using a crime
preference,
that was
I think
created for
that
one
that's reflected
situation,
in the criminal
financial
system as
fraud,
well.
applied somewhere else.
Some of the most vicious killers I
Fair point.
have read about were
Well,
women.
ultimately, the Supreme Court overruled,
Yeah, fair point.
threw away the
So
prosecution.
I have
so
worked
don't
with
believe
plenty
there
of
actually
female
was any
criminals,
guilty.
so they
How do
do
we fix this
prosecute
problem?
them. But yeah, you're right.
I would advise
They may
active
not do it as
review of both
often, and
regulations
certainly
and statutes to
personally,
first
like
find the stuff that's
Lizzie Borden, she
obviously
got off because she
outdated,
was a woman.
obviously
They
doesn't
thought
fit modern
she wasn't
society,
even
but
capable of
also
doing
I
it.
think you can address more serious things. One example I would point to for review of old things that we no longer want is the base realignment and closure
Gentlemen's time's
commissions.
expired, but you may finish your answer.
That might be an example to point to.
So I interrupted you. Please finish. Please restate what you were saying.
I was saying one example of government reform where we looked back on things that we didn't want anymore and tried to figure out what could we get rid of was the base realignment and closure commissions.
Okay.
a similar approach might work here.
Thank you very much.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tiffany. Chair recognizes the ranking member from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tyler, you launched the Corrections Accountability Project at the Urban Justice Center. As I understand it, the goal was to eliminate the influence of commercial interests on the criminal justice system and those it touches. Could you explain the various ways in which the criminal justice system has been financially exploited?
Absolutely, thank you. The Corrections Accountability Project is a predecessor to Worth Rises. And I think one of the ways to think about it is the ways in which like the prison industry is both working in tandem with sort of the correctional system, but also at times exploiting the correctional system for its own gains. And so, what we see is a massive industry that has been built, and oftentimes, sometimes in conflict with the correctional system. So a correctional system that wants to provide care with correctional healthcare companies that are actually cutting costs dramatically and in many ways harming people significantly inside of prisons and jails. And so that's just one example. But there is a really broad industry here that has kind of leached its way onto our carceral system.
And so you believe that the prison industry has come to depend on stripping people of their liberty?
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, if you take the biggest example, right, the private prison operators that are actually publicly traded, they have minimum occupancy guarantees embedded in their contracts with agencies that are 80%, 90% requiring all of their beds, or 80% or 90% of their beds to be filled. So there's no doubt that they have an interest in putting more people behind bars.
Do you believe the
fact that
prison
a lot of people don't know is
private
that
prison
prisons are
industry should
private
be abolished?
owned. They are not property
Absolutely.
of the
I
federal
think there's
government.
no world that we can have a just system where people are profiting off of putting people in prisons and jails. There's only two ways for a business to make money. And my career before what I do today was on Wall Street, and I worked at the Goldman Sachs and the Morgan Stanleys and the Citigroups of the world. And there's two ways you make money. You either increase revenue, which for the prison industry means more bodies behind bars for longer, or you cut costs, expenses, which means basically worse quality and
And
care.
how does the prison industry work to increase the number of prisoners?
They lobby and they give campaign financing donations to those who are interested in tough on crime laws. They have done that extensively.
Now, thank you. Approximately 68 million Americans have a criminal record. We're aware of the direct costs of law enforcement, prison, and courts, as well as the cost to businesses and the economy. Can you discuss the cost to the individual of having a criminal record? How does it impact their quality of life and their ability to contribute to society and the overall economy?
So there are all 45,000 collateral consequences to being incarcerated. These, and just having a criminal conviction generally, these collateral consequences can impact your ability to get housing or access public assistance. As was mentioned, it can impact your ability to get a professional license, which can hinder your future sort of income. In fact, when people are incarcerated, their families immediately see a decline of income of 22%. And even when they come home, income is depressed by 15% after incarceration. What that does is it hinders their ability to sort of grow economically up the ladder, and not just for them, but also their families.
Is there a correlation between collateral consequences that hinder the reintegration into society of offenders and recidivism rates?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, there's no way to think about a world in which you're creating more crime, creating more collateral
Recidivism is a
consequences,
complicated
creating a situation and people have
topic.
less economic opportunity, and expecting them to be able to exist in the society
It has a lot.
productively.
I mean,
Right? At the
it
end of the
certainly
day,
has
people will do what they
something
need
to
to
do
do to
with
make
the
ends
things that
meet,
she's
to
discussing,
eat,
but
to find a place
there's
to
a lot
sleep,
to it.
right?
There's
We
a
are
whole
seeing
psychology
these
of
cases of
recidivism.
people who have nowhere else to turn but sleeping on the street, and those becoming criminalized behaviors.
And finally, what needs to be done to improve reentry outcomes?
We need to invest in community support. The reality is that prisons were not meant for care, and that if we really want to address the social ills that lead to criminal behavior, we need to provide support and fund that support in community.
Thank you. And lastly, You said there were 32,000 consequences?
45,000.
How do you measure, where do you get that statistic?
There's actually a database partially where BJA is actually involved, where they have measured the number of collateral consequences across states. So that's consequences at the federal level as well as consequences in every state for having a criminal conviction.
There are 45,000 possible consequences to an individual.
Yes, to having a criminal conviction.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing today. Mr. Tolman, in your testimony earlier, you mentioned a few reasons why overcriminalization is a problem. You said that the average American commits 3 felonies a day without even knowing it. What are some of those examples?
Well, the crimes on the books right now, there are many that are almost laughable. A federal crime to write a check for under $1, for example. I personally had a case in which a father and son were cold and didn't think they would make it out of the wilderness, and they cut up a park bench and burned it to stay warm, and they were charged. And
Federal crime,
put in jail.
destruction of property.
So it's examples like that we could go through. Those would be the low-hanging, easy fruit for Congress to get rid of many of those laws.
My understanding is one of them is to sell malt liquor labeled as pre-war strength.
Yes.
Like, what is that about?
Yeah, you know, the liquor business is very, very serious. You can't label it. When they were regulating it very, very tightly, then, you know, there were issues with how they would be labeled in order to, you know, not falsely advertise the contents, and you developed the bottled and bond laws, which required certain levels of alcohol. Those are still on the books.
So the good stuff was the pre-war stuff.
That's right.
I think it'd be so fun to go through all the old laws.
You also
that we
spoke that the current
elect.
DOJ is choosing to throw away the rule of law when they attack political enemies. Can you talk about that a little bit and give me some examples of how that's happening?
It is a recent, I think, more recent development. There's always been at times pressures. When I was U.S. Attorney, I received a phone call from a member of Congress to investigate his political opponent. And I indicated that I would not, and that if he had a claim that he should submit it to the FBI. But I think there are good, you know, well-meaning individuals that try to make those good decisions. But there's no question you cannot simultaneously proliferate the laws and expand the power of the prosecutor and at the same time expand immunity protection. You can't take away accountability and give them more power and not expect abuse to come as a result.
You know, Mr. Tolman, I think it's interesting. You know, prosecutor abuse happens. It's happened for years. I mean, you look at in the case of politics, you look at like Senator Ted Stevens as an example several years ago. But to me, it seems to be much more in your face than it has ever been before. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
And I think the prime example would probably be the prosecution of President Trump under federal law and, quite frankly, under state law too.
Well, you have a prosecution going on right now that individuals on both sides of the aisle have commented on the lack of evidence, the inapplicability of the law, the attempt to manipulate the facts in order to go after. Whether you like him or don't like President Trump, it should be concerning that a prosecutor would be able to manipulate their way into the courtroom against a political opponent.
Correct. And I'm going to switch gears on you again. You mentioned several examples, writing a check, the pre-war stuff, pre-war liquor. How can we, or even federal agencies, start to rein in this growth, quite frankly, in the administrative state? How can we do that?
I think there are plenty of professors, advocates, groups, even like Right on Crime, the organization I'm with, or many of the other organizations here, that would be willing to lend a hand to identify the criminal statutes and the criminal regulations that are outdated and could very easily be taken off the books. And that process should begin, and it should maintain. So you should continually be doing that as we move forward. Otherwise, we're just collecting and compiling and bloating our criminal code.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. I want to turn to you. The expansion of our federal criminal laws and encroaching on areas traditionally governed by the states, creating constitutional tensions, redundancies in statutes. You know, prior to Congress, I served in the General Assembly of South Carolina. And I want to make sure that federal laws don't really overcomplicate efforts that are happening on the state and local level. Can you talk a little bit about how federal regulations are affecting state economies and local businesses?
Yes, thank you. It's a subtle effect in the work that I've done. Generally speaking, there's not a single regulation that will put a business out of business, but it's the death by 10,000 cuts sort of effect, or in this case, over 1 million cuts. So I've found that as federal regulation accumulates over time, it slows down investments in new ideas, and then it slows down innovation, and that ultimately makes businesses suffer because they can't put out new products, can't employ more people. There's all sorts of consequences all the way down the line.
So death by 1,000 cuts, the straw that broke the camel's back. These are the things that local businesses are facing every single day from the growth of the federal regulatory overreach.
Absolutely.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Purcell, the Mercatus Center was founded
Is that
and is
Hank?
funded
Do I
by
hear
the Koch
Hank's voice?
family
Oh, nice.
foundation. Isn't that correct?
Is that for me, sir?
Well, Mr. Purcell, you're with the Mercatus Institute also, correct?
No, sir.
Just you, Mr. McLaughlin?
I am with the Mercatus Center, yes,
Okay,
sir.
and you are familiar with the fact that the Mercatus Center was founded and funded by the Koch family foundation.
I was founded long before I was employed there. I'm not privy to the details of the founding. I'm not privy to the details of the funding.
So you don't know anything about the Koch brothers then?
I probably know less than you, sir.
Boy, gosh, you're really putting me on a pedestal there. I think you probably have superior knowledge. You're just being modest, but
Because Coca-Cola is made in Georgia.
Right on Crime is also Koch brothers funded. Isn't that correct?
This is also
We have a number of funders. So
one of
Brothers is one of them.
one of them is also
If there were too
also
many
the
people
Just
on it.
Trust.
He
And
has actually funded you at the rate of about $5 million. Isn't that correct?
I don't have those numbers.
And then you come and you make the case against Alvin Bragg for prosecuting Donald Trump. And you also served as a pardon broker during the waning days of the Trump administration when pardons were being dispensed as if they had been paid for. Correct?
No, that's not correct.
About
It's not
you
correct.
serving as a
I'm very, very
pardon-
proud. I was an attorney and I represented individuals who were deserving of clemency.
pardons.
And I represented many and wish that we would have been able to get many through. And clemency, those last days
Well,
were not the way
this is-
clemency
this is
should
not
be
about-
run.
This
And
is not about pardons. I don't want to get bogged down on pay to play, but I do want to commend the Koch brothers for having an interest in criminal justice reform. They're to be commended for that, but I wonder whether or not they are looking down the line about perhaps being more involved in the privatization of the prison industrial complex. We spend about $80 billion to incarcerate, $80 billion annually to incarcerate 2.2 million people. Ms. Tylek, can you give us, I'm wondering whether or not Koch brothers is interested in criminal justice reform because at some point they see dollar signs about privatization of the criminal justice system, just as they have supported the civil justice system privatization with forced arbitration. Can you comment on that for us, Ms. Tyler, please?
Sure. Well, I definitely don't want to ascribe intention to anyone I don't know. And so I can't say for certain what their long-term plans are. What I can say is that it's not uncommon for people in this space to get into and invest in this industry with other long-term plans. There was a mention earlier of the school to prison pipeline. We actually recently found that there are people interested in the prison to nursing home pipeline. And looking at ways to invest in correctional health care because they already own nursing homes on the outside. That said, I will give one nod and say that Americans for Prosperity, which is one of the Koch's sort of nonprofit organizations, does actually support the end to the prison telecom industry.
That industry, by the way, generates
Just a little bit of
1.4
everything there with
billion,
what she
just
said.
telecom.
Just
billions.
everybody,
Taking also
school,
the,
nursing homes,
backs
healthcare,
of
and phone
inmates,
calls.
relatives who are seeking to
Well, that
communicate
might
with their
explain
loved
why
ones.
she said there's, what did she say,
And how about
45,000
how
lateral
medical care and
consequences
food
to being
for
incarcerated or
the
something ridiculously crazy?
inmates come into play in terms of privatization?
I think in our time, I want to really specifically address healthcare, because healthcare in prisons and jails right now is under attack. It has been completely, in many cases, privatized. And one of the most egregious examples of sort of bankruptcy fraud and some things happening currently is Corizon's bankruptcy. So for those who aren't aware, Corizon—
Time has expired, but you may continue your answer.
I'll just say really quickly, Corizon is a major correctional healthcare company that was saddled with over $1 billion in lawsuits and settlements, and they separated the company into two, gave one half all the liabilities, the other half all of the assets, and then they bankrupted the liabilities and all the families who lost their loved ones.
That's a little shady.
And that's not against the law.
Gentlemen's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from
Right, that seems like there
Alabama,
should be a
Mr.
law on the books.
Thank you,
for
Mr.
that.
Chairman. Mr. Tolman, I have a friend who was an assistant attorney general in Alabama, and he actually told me you could go in a Publix grocery store and lock the door and charge every single citizen in there with some kind of crime if you were looking to do so. And so how does the overwhelming expansion of the federal criminal laws now affect ordinary citizens' ability to abide by the law?
When I was U.S. attorney, I used to tell people that give me a person or a company and give me just any time in their books or in their documents or in their affairs, and I could find a crime that we could apply. That's how confident I was as a prosecutor that the expansion was so robust. And it is no coincidence we have 1 in 3 Americans with a criminal history, whether arrest or conviction, and those two are connected, inextricably connected, with the expansion of our criminal laws and then the failure to rein in any prosecutorial abuse of it.
And I think Mr. Pirtle hit on a point in his opening testimony about we've got to have trust in the justice system within this country. That undermines our entire ability to be a nation, to be a nation of laws. And so I also, when I was doing our town halls in August of 21, the number one concern with the citizens that I spoke with was the weaponization of the government against them. And of course, we recently hired a bunch of IRS agents, I think 87,000 new IRS agents. Those are the kind of things to me that just send the wrong signal
That's
of what
what
we
we
need to be doing
need,
as a
more
nation.
IRS
So I was, Dr. McLaughlin, I want to talk a little bit about regulatory. And I was a small business owner, and it seemed like every day I was either dealing, well, I can remember one day specifically, I was dealing with the IRS, the DOT, the EPA, just trying to run a small business. One of my favorite quotes is Ronald Reagan said, "The government's idea on the economy is when it's moving, you tax it. If it keeps moving, you regulate it. And when it fails, you subsidize it." And so, Dr. McLaughlin, could you elaborate a little bit on the regulations and how that impacts small business and even our economy? I know you talked a little bit about it earlier, but that's part of the thing we've not really talked a lot about today. We talked a little bit about criminal, but certainly regulatory, the impact on the economy itself. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Absolutely. Thank you. My career has built up first a way of measuring how much regulation there is and how many crimes there are. Because we have this metrics, we can measure it. We can see what are the effects on small businesses, what the economy overall. So one study that I published a few years ago was looking at small businesses in particular. They found that they get overwhelmed when there's a bunch of regulations created all at once. And the thing I want to point out, this is not surprising, right? All businesses must deal with these costs, but it's worse for small businesses than large businesses. Large businesses are able to absorb all those costs at once, whereas small businesses flounder.
Yeah, certainly. I think, like you said, the small business owner doesn't have all the attorneys. He doesn't have the team of lobbyists, whatever the case may be, to try to work through that process. Mr. Pirtle, I remember I was when I was first elected to Congress, I was sworn in 21, and I was getting on an airplane all the time. They said, federal law requires that you wear a mask, and I didn't remember voting on that. So very often it seems like to me there's a lot of regulatory or a lot of things, supposedly law, that are put on the books by agencies, if you will. Could you elaborate a little bit on what that impact has on the American citizen itself? And we can't keep up, obviously.
Right, and I think that's the real problem, because it means that as a free people, we can't even know what the laws are, so we can't even comply with them. So it really undermines that trust and faith in the law. When you've got hundreds of thousands of regulations that are out there that carry a criminal penalty, and as Mr. Tolman pointed out, some of them are just kind of comical. Some of them are contradictory, so that you can literally, no matter what you do, you could be prosecuted for a crime, because criminalize both sides of the behavior, so to speak. And I think with the regulatory, I think a lot of this is frankly, there's so much congressional authority has been delegated to the executive branch and independent agencies that I think it's a real challenge. And I think better guidance on what they can do with that authority when Congress delegates it would be good. And Congress pulling that authority back in more often would be very good as well.
Absolutely.
How does the Faith and
It should be
Family or
Congress who makes
Faith
the
and Freedom
laws,
Coalition
not
view the
these
moral aspects of
regulatory
criminalizing trivial and inadvertent actions? How do y'all view that?
Right, no, that's absolutely wrong. Criminal sanctions are one of the most powerful forms, one of the most incredible powers that we give to government. The fact that we can take life or liberty from someone, and trivializing that it harms the family, it harms our communities, it overburdens the taxpayers, and it's not necessary for public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes now the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs. Thank you, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, for convening this hearing. And I thank all of you for being here and sharing with us your expertise and your ideas. I wanted to focus on a particular area of criminalization or over-criminalization. And I'll relate it to an experience I had just recently in the last few weeks. I met with Secretary of Corrections for Pennsylvania. Her last name is Harry, from our Department of Corrections. She shared that in the facilities she oversees, a staggering percentage of inmates struggle with addiction and mental health challenges. This is not new to any of you, I know that. Just by her round estimates, this is not perfect data, 70% struggle with substance use or addiction, and anywhere between 15 to 35% mental illness, women and men. And so I raise that because it bears repeating. More than 1 in 3 people in our federal prisons have a history of mental illness, and probably 2 in 3 are struggling with some kind of an addiction. It's an important issue for me and my family. We have had folks who have struggled with addiction and are blessedly in recovery. Not everybody gets that, and they are not incarcerated. Not everybody gets that. So, Ms. Tyler, I'd like to start with the facts that you used in your written testimony. Every 3 seconds, someone in the United States is arrested, most often for low-level infractions, including drug offenses. And those arrested are disproportionately Black, brown, and poor. Thanks for grounding us in that reality. We have to continually say that.
I didn't know poor was an ethnicity now.
About what's going on with our carceral system. What has your work taught you about the connection between addiction and incarceration? Specifically, what impact does incarceration have on somebody?
Oh, I can't wait to hear what she says. I used to work at a halfway house, so.
Addiction, drugs are actually the #1 arrested crime in the entire country. So of all those crimes that we're talking about, drugs is the center of everything. And that, is in part because of the failed war on drugs that we've seen over all these years, and the reality that there is no way to incarcerate our way out of drug addiction. Drug addiction does, in many cases, have the dual diagnosis of mental health, where people are trying to self-medicate. And so that you can't really separate drug addiction from the issue of mental health in many cases. And over the last since the 1950s, 1960s, we have completely deinstitutionalized all support for mental health, right? And so as a result, we have 350,000 people who are incarcerated today with a serious mental illness, not just a history of mental illness. And so what we really need is we actually need a care approach to drug addiction. We need to be actually providing treatment. And there is nothing about prisons, the way they are built, the way they are designed, the way they are financed, the way they are structured, that is meant to help deal with drug addiction. Those things need to happen in our community, and we need to be investing them through harm reduction and then further efforts to actually get people back to productivity.
I completely agree with
That's
you.
not
and
100%
we have to
accurate.
change the narrative.
We can
on
get
all
into
of
that afterwards.
Mr. Tallman, drawing on your experience as a prosecutor, I'm sure you did work with many cases where the defendant suffered from addiction. I was reading something in your testimony on page 2. More and more individuals on both sides of the political aisle are recognizing that many of these low-level offenders are being given extremely long sentences in federal prisons, sentences that too often do not match the gravity of the crimes committed. I'm still quoting you. Take drug offenses as an example. The Department of Justice is expected to use the hammer of mandatory minimum sentences to identify and take down kingpins at the high level. And I'll end there by saying not an addict, a user, a small possession case. What do you see, and maybe from your own work in the criminal justice system, what's the chances of a defendant's recovery when he or she, most often he, but he gets the hammer for low-level drug offense?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's important, critically important, that people understand that we are doing a disservice by lengthening the sentences on what is, in essence, low-level drug cases. And when I tell you that, I
agree with that.
I have a friend who is a prosecutor for 25 years. I asked him, federal prosecutor, how many kingpins did you get in your 25 years? He said 1.
Oh.
And yet he was applying mandatory minimums to low-level distribution. Why? Because they can. And the philosophy is that if you have the case, you're going to reward your prosecutors if they're being aggressive and they're prosecuting a lot of people. That's how they get pats on the back. And so that's the danger of overcriminalization.
It also saves your
The
butt
impact
in the
that
political
has
appointment
on
because it
families
makes
of
it
the
look like you're
incarcerated
doing your
and the
job
future
or doing
prosecutors.
something
Thank you. I
proactive.
yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes now
Yeah,
the gentlelady from
absolutely.
Florida, Ms. Lee.
Mr. Tolman, I'd like to go back to a concept that you raised earlier that I think is one of the really broad ideas we need to focus on here today. And that is that the advent of overcriminalization empowers rogue or politically motivated prosecutors to identify a person or target to prosecute rather than bringing criminal prosecutions based upon community needs, community safety, or the principles necessarily of fairness and equity. And you raised a particular example that I believe is instructive, and that is DA Alvin Bragg. I'd like to return to him for just a moment.
also
Mr.
argue
Tolman,
a lot
it is
of the
correct, is it
statistics
not,
of
that
that
the
as well.
case that Mr.
Many,
Bragg
many,
brought
many,
against President
the
Trump is
majority of
actually
those are
predicated
politically
upon
motivated.
a set of misdemeanors for which the statute of limitation has run.
Yes, that is correct.
And would you agree, Mr. Tolman, that in fact that case is a good example of overcriminalization leading to selective or what appears to be entirely politically motivated prosecution?
When they have so many tools at their disposal and the ability to manipulate them, that is what overcriminalization ultimately leads to, is the use of the criminal code for something other than administration of fairness and justice.
Do you think
Mr. Patel, I'd like to return to
and
testimony that you gave in your opening statement that
now?
referred to criminal conduct that was not inherently blameworthy, rather the criminalization of conduct that wouldn't inherently be identified as wrong or blameworthy. And I'd like to discuss the concept of mens rea. How do you think we could use or integrate the concept of mens rea to ensure that that type of conduct to which you refer is not criminalized?
Well, I thank you for the question. The concept of mens rea is critical. I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said, even a dog knows the difference between being tripped over and being kicked. That guilty mind element is a necessary component to take away life or liberty from someone. So I think one of the things that can be done is really taking a look where this shows up more often than not is in the regulatory realm, where either Congress has given vague or an ambiguous term to an agency and the ability to criminalize behavior, or an agency is stretching beyond a little bit, maybe a little beyond what Congress had intended it to be able to do. But I think that there was a bill a number of years ago that would have simply, if there was no mens rea in a federal statute or a federal regulation, it would insert a default mens rea requirement into the regulation of the statute. And I think that that would be a huge step forward by Congress.
And Mr. McLaughlin, or Dr. McLaughlin, I'd like to go back to testimony you gave earlier as well. You used as an analogy the base realignment and closure commissions as a concept on how we might come at identifying all of these regulations and all of these things that we need to take account of and address as Congress. Would you go into some more detail there about your thoughts on how we might identify all of these regulatory agencies who have acted with such overreach and diminish the amount of these purported crimes that are out there?
Sure.
Yes,
The
apply
BRAC
BRAC to
commissions was
everything.
An example of, they put together a blue ribbon panel of experts to look at what can we get rid of, where we need to keep, what's essential. That's just one approach. I think another approach that we've seen be very effective in finding someone to go back and identify regulations that could be cut because they aren't accomplishing their purpose, but they're creating harm, is regulatory budgeting. And this is where you put the agencies themselves on the task of finding old regulations that they've written.
Felony.
And that they can get
You
rid
said the
of.
budgeting
And say,
word,
if you want to make a
felony.
new regulation, great, go do your job. But if you're going to do that, get rid of something that's on the books and has been there for 30 years that you think isn't effective anymore.
And then you mentioned also that you particularly utilized data and research and analysis in your work in identifying where these problems might exist. Are there ways in which you think Congress could use the same types of tools to assist us in our work?
Sure. One easy example here is the dates when statutes and regulations were made and looking if they've been updated, especially regulations. I can run a computer program through this Code of Federal Regulations and find when each regulation was last updated. If something hasn't been updated in 20, 30, 40 years, maybe it's time to get rid of it, or at least look at whether it's time to get rid of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Lady
It would
yields back
also
to
help
now
identify
recognize the
duplication.
Distinguished ranking member from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for her 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I don't think that
let
they
me,
should be
thank you very
criminalized
much.
rules regulations either.
Mr. Chairman, you must
And
have
I think that gives these
some
regulatory
uncanny
agencies
sense
way
of
too much power.
rightness or timeliness to hold
They
this
want to
hearing.
create a law.
Today, as I indicated, every part of America seems to be
ATF can
focused
issue fines based off
on,
of what they make you take
student
out of your
protests,
luggage
which we haven't had
arbitrarily,
in a
and you
while.
don't even
I
have
can
due
recall,
process. I made the mistake one time
my years
uh,
of campus
before my
activity
mother
in
passed away
particular,
on an emergency trip home,
when it was
and that
extremely,
the book bag I'd used was also my range bag, and I forgot a small brick of
exercised, if you
ammunition.
will. It was
And I got a
extremely
letter in the
active
mail
and
about 60
engaged,
days later
and
after dealing
students
with
had any
ATF at the
myriad of
airport
activity to
that I'd
engage
been
in the war.
arbitrarily
Of course,
fined
Vietnam War was
$125
certainly one
and
of
flagged,
great
and there
height.
was no way
What we
I
call the
could
Black
get
Power
around it at
movement
all
was
because
an
of the
important
regulation. And
The whole issue of discrimination.
never paid
against,
it, but about a year later, I got a
minority
letter
students, in
saying that
particular, in this
the
instance,
fine had been
African-American
dismissed.
students.
Oh,
There was a
well, that's
long
good.
litany, and these were
You're
legitimate
lucky. I just read an article
grievances that
about someone
individuals
who
had.
went to, I
I am
think they went to
particularly
the UK,
grateful. I don't know,
and
Mr.
sort of kind
Tolman,
of the same
whether or
situation.
not
They had 12 rounds of
we will
ammunition
have
in
a
their
new
suitcase that they forgot
litany of
about.
offenses
And I
by
think
the
they got
time we get out
sentenced
of
to
this
something
hearing.
ridiculous like 12
I
years,
hope not. I
which is
hope that
crazy,
we
but
will
that's
not,
obviously another
design
country. But
more
now the
grievances,
ATF is
Ms.
also
Tyler and others,
passed
for
this new
college
regulation that
students to be
anyone
charged with.
who is going to
This is
purchase a
a
gun
perfect,
and your background check fails for
how should I
whatever
say
reason,
it,
could just be
scenario
paperwork,
of
some
freedom of
issue,
speech,
right? Because that
protests.
happens.
I
You
can't imagine what else, and hope
you
there's no
automatically
other
have
litany of
to
things that these
the
students might be
what is
engaged
it,
in.
like
They
the,
have the right
I don't know if it's the
for their
Secretary of
expressions
State, but
to
the
be heard.
AG, all of the
And I
sheriff's
want to,
offices,
for
all of
one,
the police
indicate
departments,
that I support the
all
freedom of
these
speech,
agencies within the state have to be notified now of
freedom
every
of
single
the right
person
to
who fails
associate.
the background
The
check.
First Amendment is a
They have to know
wide,
the person's name,
vast
where they tried to
amendment
purchase
that
the gun,
many people have
all kinds of information.
misused. So
It's
in any
just
event, the
crazy.
chairman has certainly picked a very timely
and the EPA
moment
as
for
well.
these
Don't even get me
cases.
started on
And
what they
I
just
hope
did.
that we will be handling them.
EPA is another
appropriately,
agency that is kind of useless
which
most
I
of the
think
time.
is going to be most
Yeah.
important. Let me quickly
So now the
then
Biden
try
administration
to
is using it
ask
to further their
questions
socialist regime, trying
quickly
to
and
force everyone to
go to
buy
you, Ms.
electric
Colick, and
vehicles.
hope for quick answers because you graduated from Harvard, one of the
Thankfully, that'll
nation's
never happen in
renowned
Texas
universities.
because the
Have been
ERCOT Texas grid
quietly, I
system
guess,
won't
with
support
their
it.
engagement.
They
that
don't
you led
care.
the
They
nation's
just
first
passed a new
successful campaign
rule
to
that
make jail phone calls
I think
free.
as of, it's not very long.
I remember
like
that case. I was here in the Judiciary Committee. It was
each
an unbelievable
car dealer
expression of
has
free
to have
speech.
a
But you
certain,
are right.
certain
Women
number
carry the
of
heavy burden
electric
of
vehicles. If they sell
carrying
over
forward this
their
whole
quota
idea
of
of the
gas
cost
powered
of being
vehicles, they're
incarcerated
fined
in
like
many different
20
ways.
or
Travel, bus fares,
$22,000
all of that was
per
excessive.
vehicle.
And so I have a
Uh,
very quick
they,
question.
I think
How much were
that,
inmates required
in
to
my
pay
theory,
for phone calls
that is
at
part of
that
the reason why
time?
he's letting
And
the
what
gas
other
prices go up
ways
so high
do
too. Because then
corporations
people
make
will be
money?
like,
And if you can just
well,
do that very quickly,
maybe
I
it
have
would be better. But,
series, I
the
see where I
average
am on the clock.
electric
I have a
vehicle
series
costs
of
almost
questions
44 or
that you just
$54,000.
might, just give me a brief scenario
People can't
because
afford to pay the
I've got a
groceries
series
and
of
pay
other
their
questions
utility
for
bills. Now they're going to have to buy these
witnesses.
other
Very
cars.
quickly, at the time in New York, it was 50 cents for the first minute and 5 cents every minute after that. But throughout
Give
the
it a
country,
couple
those costs
years,
can still
and
run
especially
25,
if
50, even 75
someone
cents a
takes a
minute.
nap
And
and
that
gets
labor is not
reelected,
just, or that cost is
they'll
not just
find a
physical,
way
it is
to
also
welfare
emotional labor.
You could
subsidy
run up to how
the
much?
purchase of EVs,
Today,
just
they
like they
still
did with
can
so
run
many
up to
other
about
things.
70,
Yeah.
75 cents a
I
minute.
mean, thankfully, there's
in
a lot of
2024.
lawsuits
And
right
it
now
would
against.
cost a
There's a lot of
hardworking,
car companies
maybe hourly compensated
that are
person,
fighting
how
this
much?
because
What would they wind up taking
it's
care of the
just
children, taking
it's
care of the
absolutely
grandchildren?
A few, I mean, we're talking
mentioned
about a
that
few $100s a month,
$22,000
and for
per
people who are
car they sell
incarcerated that are
over
either
their
making
quota.
nothing or 9
And
cents,
you have no
10 cents,
choice.
15 cents an hour,
Nobody
it can be
voted on
hours
this.
worth of labor
It
before
didn't
they
go
can get
through
a simple
Congress.
15-minute call.
This
So
is
what
just
has been
something that
a
they've decided to
hourly
mandate.
charge,
So
that hourly,
that
but what
isn't
has been
even so
a
this
meager offense
democracy. That's
may
a
wind up
socialist state now saying this is the type of
bankrolling you,
car
may
you
wind
have
up
to buy.
breaking
You
your
don't get a
account
choice.
literally.
Absolutely. 1 in 3 families are going into debt over the cost of a simple phone call in 2024.
Which leads to why am I being slapped more than once on the incarceration for a very low level crime, if you will, if you
And
can
why
say
is my
that
family being slapped in that case?
for sure. Let me go to Mr. Tolman. There are many overlapping statutes in the Federal Criminal Code. For example, there are more than 24 different false statement statutes, Chapter 47, Title 18, which is a famous title. There are also a number of fraud statutes and obstruction statutes. So give me, how could we reduce these of the statutes that overlap? And I do want to just make a point, if you can answer that, but I also want to say that my comments are not pointed to Mr. Bragg because it is in the judicial system and I'm going to allow the judicial system to work its will. But I would like Mr. Tolman to be able to answer this question,
Yes.
please.
Of course, the gentlelady's time has expired, but Mr. Tolman, you may answer the question.
Thank you. There's no question that if we need to take current federal statutes right now and we need to see the overlap. There are ways you can do that through, programs that you can run, but we absolutely, as Congress should, and groups, advocacy groups should be looking very closely at the overlaps of these statutes because many of them can result in adding additional charges when you otherwise wouldn't, because as a prosecutor, you wanted to make sure you had all of the potential crimes at issue. And so then you get bloated indictments that have multiple counts in them when really they should be charged with what the heart of or the essence of the crime is.
Well, thank you very much. We want to do good in public service, not do bad and do ill. Thank you so very much. With that, I wish I had more time, but thank the witnesses, and I yield to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. So I recognize myself for my questions. So the first thing I want to just say is I appreciate the testimony. When I first got in, I thought to Congress, I thought we really need to do this because in my law practice, people said, why'd you go into politics? I said, because most of my clients had been abused by just the regulations. So let's see here. I'm going to ask all of you this question before, and I want you to think about it because I appreciate all of you have produced in your documents and in your testimony today some reform movement that you think we should do. I want each one of you to give us the lowest hanging fruit, because that's always the easiest for Congress to do. You know, as I like to say, I'm willing to do, it was the least I can do. I'm always happy to do the least I can do. So that's kind of the Congress's attitude on this. So we want to do that. So I'm going to ask each of you to do that. But in speaking to that, I also want us to focus on really what Congress can do, because we have actually been derelict in our duty, in my opinion. And that's the problem. And we need now to be active. And I know that, and you don't say the mens rea thing, because we all agree on the mens rea thing. Okay, so I need something else besides the mens rea issue. Okay?
Do they all? I want to know that all
Ms.
of them,
Tyler, you had,
including the
I think,
Democrats.
about 20 different reforms that you put in yours. So if you can just give me your top one, your number one, that'd be good.
I don't know if it's the lowest hanging fruit, but I do think ending the exception in the 13th Amendment is a critical step for our country. And in the 250th year anniversary that's coming, I would say that.
Okay, you're right. That may not be the lowest hanging fruit.
Okay, make phone calls free in federal prisons permanently. You already
Okay.
did it in the CARES Act. We can just make it permanent policy.
Okay, that may be the lowest hanging fruit, but I'll take a look at your other proposal there. Thank you, Ms. Tyler. Mr. Tolman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would very strongly urge, you've obviously talked about mens rea. Everybody understands that passage alone would be the largest Band-Aid until you could deregulate.
You were just told
so
not
I
to
would
mention
then
mens
say
rea, Mr. Tolman.
deregulation, and if you do have, President Trump put in place, if you're going to pass a regulation, you've got to get rid of two. And whatever you think about it, that was really good governance. And the Congress forcing the agencies to do that would probably be the most important thing they could do immediately.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Dr. McLaughlin.
So I agree with Mr. Tolman. The changing the incentives of regulatory agencies to review their own regulations, the old ones, to identify duplication or contradiction. And you could accomplish that through a regulatory budget, such as the 1 in, 2 out, or other means as well. I think that's the
He's
lowest
just about to
hanging fruit,
propose
to make
a
agencies review their own rules and get rid of ones that aren't effective.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Patel.
I would associate myself with those, so I'll take a slightly different tact. I think there are a couple of bills before Congress right now that might really be interesting, that do things to ameliorate for folks who are already incarcerated or reentering back into society some of the burdens that we've talked about here today. The first would be the Federal Prison Oversight Act, which came out of the Oversight Committee. I think maybe unanimously, but overwhelmingly for sure, bipartisan support. I think there's also a bill called the Safer Supervision Act, which would help before this committee, which would help incentivize moving folks who are compliant, who've served their term and are compliant with their terms of their release into society more quickly, so we can focus on the more dangerous folks still within the system. And the other would be the Clean Slate Act, which we mentioned. We were talking about the host of collateral consequences that we have, that for lower level offenders who have committed nonviolent crimes, that you would seal their record after they commit their, complete their sentence and complete their supervision without committing new crimes. You'd seal their record so that it'd be easier for them to get housed, to get licensure, to get a job and things like that, and reenter back into community. Once again, removing them out of the criminal justice system so that we can refocus our criminal justice system on the most dangerous. And really, I'd love to see something done with clearance rates, which are really quite low.
Thank you. And I'll just say that a couple of things that I've thought of. I appreciate your suggestion that some of these things need to move to civil penalties. And I couldn't help but think of the ranking member's discussion of the explosion in Texas City. Is that where it was? Texas City. There was no reason, quite frankly, in my mind, for the feds to get involved. You could have prosecuted the execs who had overt violations of safety regs for manslaughter, at least, and you could also have facilitated civil rewards, which is actually really what you needed when people are maimed or killed, is in my opinion. So that's one thing. The other one is maybe. And I'm really reticent to believe that bureaucratic institutions are going to give up their power base. I really don't think that's where they want to go. So maybe Congress needs to, every time, take a real good look at the rule-making process, because that's how these things occur. Number two is maybe Congress, like we do with constitutionality, you have to put something on a bill that's constitutional. You have to go in and say, maybe whether you intend or don't intend for there to be some kind of criminal punishment involved with it as well. Just another thing for Congress to do. Anyway, I appreciate all the testimony. Lot to come out of this. I think this is, I think it's actually a very complex issue that has some simple solutions in part that we need to take those first steps. And so I appreciate all your testimony today. Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Yeah.
All right, let me get rid of that. There we go. All right. Well, that was a very interesting hearing. Any what are your thoughts on sort of the overview of what they were talking about?
Well, I think a lot of it is it's stuff that's needed to be brought up before. I've noticed that in this Congress that it seems that there's a lot of items being brought up, revisited, that are way overdue. This bunch is it seems to actually be asking a lot of the right questions. Even the left side of the aisle, it seems to be asking pertinent questions that aren't entirely politically driven. Other than the please don't mention Trump in the beginning.
Right off the bat.
Yeah, that kind of seemed like it was priming the room a little bit. However, they bring up a lot of really good points here. In similar to what, I don't know if everyone may have heard this. I know we've had a lot of people come in, or correction, I typed it. Is back in the 1700s and up until mid 1800s in England, there were over 222 hanging offenses. Everything from petty theft to vagrancy could get you to dance on the end of a rope, which was replaced by transportation, which was seen as a form of clemency. And we saw what that was. And I think what a lot of it all boils down to is it's a systemic issue, and nobody has wanted to really take ownership of any really part of this. And it all kind of starts compounding on each other. And a lot of people say, oh, it'll go back home, to the home, fatherless children. Yes, that is part of it. However, we have really an open gate for so many things to get prosecuted and politically prosecuted for almost de jure, whatever it is. And you have overly aggressive prosecutors who, with the mandatory hammer type thing for drug offenses, which, Utah only got, he mentioned that his prosecution buddy had said that he'd only gotten one kingpin. Well, it's because the kingpins have money for lawyers and they have people to take the fall in between. You're not going to catch kingpins from the bottom up. But at the same time, we're still fostering this whole this whole issue. Back in England, I love using this as a really good example because they were trying to legislate population issues and economic issues by making things illegal. Why were people committing these crimes? Why were these conditions the way they are? We have that same problem today. The EV issue, they're super, super expensive, especially for people who are low income, which apparently is now an ethnicity. I want to see that on the next, I really want to see that on the next census is, and black is back. People don't have to be as PC clearly as much anymore, which just this whole thing, it's a conversation that I think has been needing to be brought up on the floor in the platforms that that we saw today. But I also don't know how much traction it's going to necessarily get. There are a lot of hearings that are hearings. And depending on the political temperature of of the room at any given time. They can go forward, they can not. Although we have seen a lot of bills, a lot of laws get passed through this Congress and through this Senate in the last couple of years. I do kind of question the timing of this particular topic, because we all know that the Democrats love to attack the judicial system and the correction system, which seem to be a big part of this hearing today. And it just so happens to be election season.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder who is up for re-election, who's greenlighting this. Although I did notice that our dear friend Veronica didn't make it to this one.
No, I'm not sure if she's on this committee or not.
Oh no, she is. I looked it up earlier to see if she or Porterhouse were going to come swinging through. I saw a great picture of Porter wearing a red dress the other day, and I just couldn't stop laughing. But you know, there's a lot of shakeup going on in the Congress, and for instance, we'll pick on Veronica's district, District 16 out in El Paso. Its neighboring district, and District 16 is essentially just El Paso.
Okay.
The other half of El Paso is part of District 23, and we have the revision of Let's Go Brandon. Brandon Herrera, the AK guy, is running for the Republican seat for District 23, which comprises the Boot Heel and Big Bend of Texas and stretches. It's one of the largest congressional districts geographically. It stretches from El Paso, East El Paso, all the way to San Antonio.
Wow.
That is a big chunk. And because of the way this administration and this Congress and the Senate have been handling border issues, he's getting a lot of traction. And I was watching a thing earlier where the congressman, he's trying to unseat a veteran, cyber intel Navy guy. So I'm still suspicious of him, but was slamming at him because he's
Dan Crenshaw, is it?
No, it's not Dan Crenshaw. It's Tony Gonzalez.
Oh, okay.
But was slamming him because he's not a politician. I think we need more people in DC who don't have that political background.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of these career politicians that they'll say and do whatever it takes to extend their time in office, or to become popular. I really think that a lot of the impeach Trump stuff was driven because it put people in spotlights in the media. Granted, it also kind of made fodder for a lot of other stuff. I mean, the House drinker, though she's not the House Speaker anymore, she's still the House drinker.
She holds that title proudly.
I think she will hold that. Smirnoff might be tapping her grave after she's buried, because I don't think
she's pickled at this point.
I think she has too much of a alcohol flammability content that A, she doesn't need to be embalmed, and then B, if she were to be cremated, that it would be an economic hazard and potential fire hazard. Way too flammable.
Nuclear bomb going off.
Right.
Yes. It's funny.
Stoli's stock is going to go down when she dies.
Right. They're going to be like, what happened? Oh, Nancy died. Oh
shit.
Yeah, it's this is a really interesting topic. I'm glad they discussed it. I agree with you. I don't know that much will come of it, though. I also agree that they really did a good job, sort of working in a bipartisan fashion. I think a lot of them, like you said, asked really good questions on both sides of it. But I wonder, you said, kind of wondering why they're doing this. I also wonder if partly they're doing it because of what's going on with Donald Trump, that they want to talk about
politicization.
Thank you, of the DOJ. And, I think that there's definitely a part of that, but it is still a really good topic to look into. But there's so many facets. Like, I think the criminal justice system in general, including the judicial system, all needs to be overhauled. There are a lot of issues. There's so many different facets that are going on there, and there's a lot of things they could do that wouldn't be that difficult to implement, especially considering how much money we can send overseas to other countries. I don't ever want to hear the well, we don't have the funding to do that excuse anymore. If we can send billions to another country, we should be able to spend billions to overhaul things in our own country. But there are things so I had mentioned I worked at a halfway house, and something like that. Now we're talking about exactly. That's the word I was trying to say. Yes. Politification similistic. Yes. That is it. You read my mind. But the recidivism is a huge problem in the prison population. And again, there's multitude reasons for this. And it's also multifaceted, like everything else in the criminal justice system. But I worked at a halfway house, and I worked with women who had addiction issues. But these were women who had been incarcerated, and they were usually they weren't all incarcerated, but the majority of them had been incarcerated, and they were able to reduce their prison time by going to a halfway house because it was a 6-month program. And so while they were there, they did group therapy, individual therapy. Then we also did case management with them, where we helped them after a certain amount of time, after so many months, like towards, I want to say like around the 4-month mark or so, 3 or 4 month mark, we would help them look for a job, and they had to do the majority of the work, but they had to look for a job. They had to be able to secure housing before they could leave. They had, so they really had to go through all these different steps. And there were going to be people that we had to send back to prison. And, I worked with, this is actually why, so I had my degree in psych, but this was why I went to also back to school for paralegal studies, because we were working not only with the criminal justice system in general, like I had to go to court and, talk on behalf of a lot of the clients. We had to work with, I was talking with probation officers daily. We had to talk to guardians and lawyers and all this stuff. So it was a really great program, because they either didn't do it and didn't put the effort in and got sent back to prison, or they really made an effort. And by the time they got to the end of the program, those 6 months, they really had sort of proven themselves to, they want to make a change. They want to get back on their own 2 feet. And by going through the program, they were able to do that, because in order to get out of the program, they had to have a job. They had to have secured housing. They had to have, and we would drug test them to make sure they weren't using. So it would be really great to see, not for all crimes, but certainly, some of the more lower level crimes, something like that, where we really work with these people to sort of help ease them back into just regular life, and get them to a point where they feel like they're on their own 2 feet before they are completely on their own. Something like that, I think, would be really fantastic to do. And I would like to see some of our money spent towards programs like that. But there's a lot of different things they could do to overhaul the criminal justice system. But I really want to be on that group that's looking at all the old laws. That would be a lot of fun. I think that would be amazing. Those old laws.
I would agree. And, I've spent a number of years affiliated with one of the county courts, the Veterans Treatment Court. Texas has got several of them. I know there are other states with some of them, and they're very similar to drug treatment courts. And they follow that model where it really is legitimate rehabilitative format. But in order to be part of the Veterans Treatment Court, it targets specifically military service members, active guard reserve, as well as the veteran population who have mental health issues. and substance abuse issues. And it's approximately a 14-month, or was approximately a 14-month program. And they were even paired up with a peer mentor to help walk with them through that. And that's partially one of the roles that I had. And it was a very similar format. They weren't incarcerated. It was part of a deferral adjudication of various charges. Granted, I had been in the courtroom multiple times where we would have folks get remanded or would get other negative action because they failed to comply with the program regs. And they would have supervision officers, also some states call them probation officers, who would come randomly, do checks.
Yep.
If they were there for a DUI type offense or even anything alcohol or drug related, even if it wasn't a moving violation, part of the rehabilitative program was they had to do random UAs, as well as some of them had these little breathalyzer things at home that they had to check in regularly. And I used to think it was messed up, but then I realized the genius of it. But it was a window of the time of day or night, not a set time. So to keep these people checking in and on track. They also had community service hours. I think community service, court mandated community service, is a very helpful tool. Unfortunately, a lot of jurisdictions no longer allow that because of certain civil rights lawsuits claiming that it was akin to chain gangs. And, because you can't pass out balloons at the mall as part of your community service, a lot of it is laborious, like picking up trash or cleaning up the park or something, graffiti mitigation. And there's a lot of talk about restorative justice and a lot of people who say they're for it, but when it comes to the actual application of it, they either don't understand it, they don't like the way it looks, or they give up because participants in those programs, there's the recidivism rate. And instead of paying for how many thousands of agents in the alphabet soup who are regulatory, not law enforcement, regulatory agencies like EPA, or even IRS that have no business with a law enforcement agency branch or a law enforcement branch, that money I think could be put more better used towards these treatment courts, these halfway house programs, and catch them while they're, I don't want to say necessarily young, but while offenders are new to the system at lower level offenses before you start getting into that warehousing of criminals and you get that institutionalization. There are certain states, Kentucky is one of them, where if you are behind the wall for a minimum of 5 years or more, when you get out of prison, you automatically qualify for welfare and permanent disability because of the alleged and possibly very real effects of mental health and inability to readapt to society. My question is okay, what is those states that have this, doing to reintegrate these offenders back into society? Instead of just opening the door, out you go, and now you have a Shawshank Redemption scene in the store.
Because that's real. That is very real. I've worked with plenty of people who would get out, couldn't handle it mentally, and would purposely, commit another crime so that they knew they would go back into prison. And that is an issue. That is a mental health issue. I can't remember. It was I think our friend in green, the one that had the 45,000, and we're still in slavery still. Or I don't know.
She's not wrong.
Well, I mean,
it's not that word. It's not. So I think from the context that I got from her, was she was taking aim at two specific things that we see in different states, and I'm going to pick on Louisiana and I'm going to pick on Colorado. Louisiana, specifically Angola Prison, which is the nation's largest hard time work farm type old school penitentiary that is almost, I think it's like 90% self-reliant. They grow their own food. Angola is also known for the Angola Prison Rodeo, which is a fundraiser. They also rely heavily on prison industry, and it's not compulsory. Granted, Angola is not a federal white collar prison where you've got 18 holes on the backyard, but you have, the Angola specifically focuses on those hard time offenders, and you're going to prison. You're going to prison. You're not going to vacation.
Right.
And then you also have Colorado, which has gotten heat over the years for prison industry, where there are private companies that utilize, prison labor. The inmates are able to earn additional cents on the dollar wages, if you can call it that they can utilize toward their commissary or their phone privileges, whatever it is, as well as earn time off. However, this private company, they have very, very few non-inmate employees. They derive their entire workforce, with the exception of management and accounting, which again, those should probably be criminals. They just haven't been caught yet. But you have those conditions, and they are allowable under law. Granted, I think she had a very loose argument, and I think she could have made a better argument if she had more time.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have opened the door like she did, knowing that she had such a window to argue her point, where quote unquote slavery is whatever. Because again, that goes into why once upon a time when we were all growing up, those of us who are over 35 can probably remember when you drive down the road and you'd see a bunch of people in orange jumpsuits or striped jumpsuits, whatever color jumpsuits that were high visibility, picking up trash along the road.
Yeah.
A lot of places, El Paso's one of them, where the whole chain gang slavery type thing, that was the argument, was that it was just the sheriff or the state or the county or whomever it is, claiming that they were just using those inmates, regardless of their offense. There was never violent offenders, I don't think, in most cases, but as slaves to pick up trash in the community. And then these same places that end up doing away with it. California is another state that does not allow that. Look at your urban environments that would normally have been picked up, and your highways that would have normally been picked up, and whatnot. I mean, I am a believer that if you do the crime, you're going to do the time, and it should not at all be soft. I don't think that a lot of things should be as illegal as they are. Marijuana is one of those interesting medications.
It's crazy what some people have been sentenced with for like an ounce of marijuana, and they're still serving time.
Exactly. Or if you make a simple little mistake, you can get, people make mistakes all the time, and one bad choice based off of, or even the fact that you were holding the bag, whatever the bag was, you're the one that got convicted. These young people are now not seeing the light of day outside the wire until they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, for these offenses. And because the only thing that they know is the system, they're products of another system. That's what she meant by the high school to prison program, is where you have these low income environments where crime is just a part of the daily life. They're literally going, even if they complete high school, they don't even complete high school all the time, and they're getting hit. You got 14-year-olds getting hit with a 20-year sentence
Yeah.
for aggravated possession because they had some kind of illegal substance on them and a weapon.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. But I do think, and I also agree with you, if you do the crime, you serve the time. When it's valid, right? And we're kind of talking about like now some of the things like, well, I don't know that, these type of possessions like should be prosecuted to the extent that they are. But at the same time, this is the thing that kills me about kind of these bleeding heart liberals who like, oh, I can't think of the term now. What you were just talking about, you said it's like the chain gang.
Oh yeah,
uh,
court mandated community service, is that one?
Community
Or is
service.
it
Yeah, community service. A lot of people who've been in prison, many who I've spoken to, actually liked the community service.
Oh,
It
yeah.
got them out of the prison. They were able to be out in the open air. They were doing something productive, right? They're not just sitting there kind of wasting away in a prison cell or in a common room. It got them doing something. And that place like Louisiana that you were talking about and the one in Colorado, like I'm sure there's probably issues with it, but I would much rather see people in prison doing things while they're there. I think having them farming is a great idea, or having them work for companies at a smaller rate, and you can figure out the particulars. I think those are actually good things. One, they're developing a skill, and two, they're being productive. They're a productive member of that society within the prison, right? So they're still in a society, it's just within different confines. So I'm all for that type of thing. I think that's much better than just having people sitting there doing nothing, because that's when they start, getting into trouble within the system. So
Exactly.
teach them, give them things to do, let them do stuff. Now, again, it depends on the crime as well. But if you've got really violent criminals, maybe not have them doing some of the same things, especially not like community service. But like you said, I don't think they were having them do that anyway.
Well, and a lot of the programs throughout the correctional system here in the United States that seem to have really good levels of success, if you call it that, are the facilities and the systems that have an educational component. You have a lot of these, as I mentioned, you've got a lot of offenders who never completed high school, and they have the opportunity to complete even at the county jail level, depending on how much time they're going to be spending there, to get their high school diploma, GED. There are certain trade programs. I would really like to see a lot of these trade programs expanded, especially considering how low density these very high demand jobs are. And I know there's arguments against some of these, like plumbing,
Again, it
plumbers,
depends on
electricians.
the person.
Yeah, I think there should be an evaluation for that. But linemen that keep our power grids running, mechanics, and there should be, after you give these people these trades, this education, these tools to be able to be contributing members of society, there should be a positive pipeline for them to transition from the prison life and prison environment into a civilian job market without having necessarily as heavy a stigma of, well, you were in prison for 5 years, so automatically, because a lot of people hear you were in prison, everybody thinks violent offender. They automatically they think all the horrible crimes. when I don't think that that's entirely the case in a majority of, I think I was reading the statistics where about roughly 80% of incarcerated inmates in the United States are non-violent offenders.
Yeah. And even
That is
some
a
of the ones
huge
that,
population.
yeah, and even the ones that, some of them that did have a violent past, like I worked at the halfway house, was one of my roles when I was working in the counseling field. But out of all of my sort of favorite clients, they were the ones that had been to prison, like some of the ones that had been to prison, and one of them, she had a very violent past. She had arson, she had a couple of other issues. My favorite client ever to work with. There was another one who, she had a really bad reputation. She was one that I had to go with her to her court date and testify on her behalf because she had such a reputation in the court. And a lot of people were afraid of her. I always got the ones that have anger issues. Apparently I worked well with them. I actually did the anger, management groups, but those were some of my favorite people to work with, so it really is, I think you're right. You need to have that evaluation of the individual in order to kind of determine, where they should go. But like even the violent offenders, some of them, they have done things, and a lot of the times, like the ones that I'm talking about, there actually were reasons why they did the things they did.
Yeah.
There might have been like sexual abuse, like, yeah, maybe she set her mom's house on fire, but there was in her mind a reason why that happened.
Yeah.
So it definitely, yeah, it should be sort of on a case-by-case basis. Christopher Christopher read my mind. Yes, this was a program. I was thinking of this when you were talking about it, about how there are some prison systems that are now using inmates to train shelter dogs. And it's fantastic for the dogs. It's fantastic for the inmates because they get that bond with the dog. I've also heard about them having, say, like a cat in the shelter, or allowing them to, like take care of certain shelter animals that maybe wouldn't find a home otherwise. And that like bond with the animal, it helps them, it brings out more of a nurturing part of their personality, right? And it gives them, they now have talked about, feeling like, well, I know this animal is completely dependent on me. And it brings out a whole different side of their personality. And programs like that, I mean, there are, as much as I say there needs to be a huge overhaul, there are some really, really good programs out there. It would just be great to see these implemented on a larger scale.
Yeah, Nevada and California both have inmate firefighter programs. Operated Nevada, it's Nevada Division of Forestry, and growing up in Southern Nevada and working in the fire service at a young age, wildland fire specifically, and then also with what my dad did. He worked for a municipality, and some of these inmate firefighters who were not during the not fiery season, the off season, they did a lot of construction type work, similar to the Civil Conservation Corps back in the 30s, and they built a lot of great things at state parks. They help with reforestation of after wildland fires. Almost every single one of them I ever had the pleasure of working with, and these are some pretty intimidating folks. I'm talking like you look at them and don't say the wrong thing because he will put a hole in your face.
Right.
Some great guys.
Yeah.
And a couple of them I've run into on the outside now that they've completed their sentence, who have gone on. I know two of them specifically that have gone on to open their own forestry businesses, and they're now GSA contractors for the U.S. Forest Service to do different things. And they wouldn't have ever had that opportunity if they hadn't gotten into the Nevada Division of Forestry program. I know very similar stories with California. And similar experiences. Now, they're not always 100%. You do have the guys and gals who work in in these programs who just, they get out, they end up back in a rut because that's just where their foundations are.
Just happens, yeah.
And it happens, although, you know, there is that opportunity, and I would rather see that opportunity exist and be expanded on than it to be to a controlled few and be the exception, because there is so much stuff. I mean, one of the biggest things a lot of people like to complain about is how, especially in certain border states, and you're starting to see it in the Midwest, how all the illegals and all these immigrants and all these migrants and everything else like that are taking all these agriculture jobs. Well, you know, we have a work pool, and I'm not saying, go, you know, turn every prison into a prison farm, but agriculture is more than just a hoe and a shovel and a bunch of dirt.
Yeah.
There's an actual science to it.
Yeah.
And there's industries in our country and in other countries that could utilize people who are interested in it and have that education. Once upon a time, FFA and 4-H were great funnels for these. And those are actually some of the least popular clubs in schools now and in programs, even though they're some of our most vital. You know, our country's losing our agriculture largely because not only is it becoming corporatized, but it's becoming corporatized because the small farmers aren't able to maintain the family farm like they used to. Out where I live is part of a big agriculture area, and pecans specifically. And there are pecan farms that have been in families for nearly 100 years that are now all getting sold off for real estate because there's no one to run the pecan orchards anymore.
Yeah. And how many like of those farmers and ranchers that could be helped out by people who, you know, maybe they've gone through several different levels of programs, and then this is sort of the next step where they go and they work on these farms or they work on these ranches and they help develop their skills, also help these, you know, ranchers and farmers. And, you know, this is a stepping stone to them then becoming able to be self-sufficient and able to work on their own.
And that's the kind of farmers, you know, farming subsidy that I think we should have instead of just paying farmers or buying them out or whatever, is helping with that workforce shortage. And, you know, there's a place in this country for everybody.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest problems, or one of the biggest deficits, one of our biggest fails that we've done is once people have gotten a conviction, is we have completely failed on that. And we've allowed the expansion of the welfare generations, because welfare is highly tied into this low economy. I mean, it's a big, ugly cycle ball that's all tied into each other. And we can do better.
Yeah. I'm really
and
curious as to what they were talking about. There was like an oversight bill, like a prisons oversight bill that was from, I think they said it was either the Judicial or the Oversight Committee. I'm really curious as to what's in that bill, because that's part of the problem. Because all of the prisons are privately owned, you know, there needs to be more regulation as to what is required of them, what they need to be doing. I think in that sense, there needs to be a lot more regulation. A lot of the time I'm for less regulation, but I think this is such an important issue that there really needs to be more regulation over these prisons.
Yeah, that's one point that I think that instead of smaller government, I think when it comes to the correction system, we need to go back into having more government involvement, because the privatization of prisons has created a lot of the things that our little green suited friend was referring to. You have states like New Mexico who have literally started turning over major level offenders that should, in my opinion, should be under the control of the state. Specifically sex offenders. The state of New Mexico sex offender unit is owned and operated on behalf of the state of New Mexico by a private company. Whoever thought that was a good idea in any state to allow private companies to be involved in the housing and management of the prison system or correction system in any state or county or whatever level, is they lost their damn mind. Because the companies, well, exactly. But the companies are out for, it's cheaper for the government, but the companies want to get the most bang for their buck.
Yeah, of course.
And that's where you have living conditions from a lot of these cases with inmates. It's because your classic government built by the lowest bidder situation. You've got the prison being managed, built, housed, everything by the lowest bidder. But you know, what are you going to do? Except for that particular opportunity, I think should be a federal level, because that's the only way the states are going to comply with it. Federal level, no. I'm sorry. On the federal level, private prisons are against. They should be illegal. For a myriad of reasons. Right. And they are not cheaper in the long run. They are very much not cheaper.
Right. I wouldn't think so. You know, or at the very, very least, so highly regulated that it's not probably worth it, you know, for the private companies, and so they sell it to the government. But yeah, I agree. I think that it should be, you know, they should be government owned. Now, will that happen? Probably not, because like everything else in the government, they let it become this big giant industry that it would be really difficult to overturn that. Christopher said, "Woke said, Chris, I always hated that the felons who got out can never get a break, including rights. They're kicked down till death. This really needs to be looked at. Our society is crumbling." Yeah, I absolutely. And not everybody, like, right? Not everybody is rehabilitatable. Is that a word? We're making it a word. But
yes, that's a word from your textbook.
I think so. Yes, it is in both my psychology books and my legal books. Rehabilitatable. There is recidivism, and some of that is just the person, right? We also have to remember these people are making their own decisions. They're adults, and you know, so some of it, a good majority of it, is on them. But if we can give them the opportunities, like you said, to succeed, as opposed to just simply setting them up to fail, you at least give them a chance to do better, and you give them the opportunity and set them up to do well. And then if they screw it up, that's on them. They're back at 100%, right? But you know, give them at least the chance to succeed. And I think doing that is, you know, regulating the prison system and really looking at, I mean, like, if we don't even know how many laws are on the book, that's a problem. Like, that's a problem.
Well, and like I said, that's where we get duplication. And why are there so many federal laws? A lot of these things, like the congressman had said in the beginning, that I believe it was the chair, you know, it wasn't until such and such until it was illegal to assassinate the president or to kill a member of Congress, or like all this boils down to exactly. It is murder. It is clearly premeditated because it's a political figure. It's not just involuntary oops manslaughter because you got into a bad accident or other conditions that statutorily fall under something other than murder.
Yeah.
You know, why do you need 8 flavors of murder?
You don't. You know, you don't.
All of it. And at what point do we have that line in the sand of this is state's jurisdiction, not federal jurisdiction? And I know there are a lot of states that are overwhelmed and underfunded and politically motivated to where they're more in favor of someone else doing it. Who is someone else? Well, anyone who's been a manager already knows the answers to that question. Your employees don't show up, it's one of the managers that has to do it. In our government, who's the ultimate manager? The feds.
Yeah.
And, you know, some states, we really need to support more states and give them the ability and the latitude to govern the way our republic was established. I know I just committed a felony by saying that word, but
It's a
ATF is
democracy.
I think I saw ATF roll up to my house. Although Scooby's still here, so I think they got a backlog. But states really, the more federal laws you start making, the less states have the opportunity to prosecute. That's what I meant by my comment earlier of, well, if states are being able to exclude candidates from the ballots, then states should be able to individually go after politicians, whether they belong to them or not. Politicians will say, oh, no, that's a bad idea. Well, then why is a state being able to pull somebody off the ballot or exclude somebody from the ballot just because they pull the party who's majority of that state at the time doesn't like them? The pendulum does swing both ways, and at some point in time, it's going to come back. And okay, we had a triple, quadruple impeachment of whatever government official, because they belonged to the wrong party and they said the wrong things on social media, or they were anything really. Well, what happens when the pendulum swings back? Well, you just established the very most magical word in law, and that is precedence. That's the thin end of the wedge. That is Pandora's box. And once you establish precedence for anything that could be tied to it, now it's open game. You are fair game down the road. And a lot of people joke about why it takes the Vatican so long to make a decision. Well, it's because the Vatican knows very damn well that there are certain things that will have lasting impacts. Congress, once upon a time, used to have that type of insight. I think that one stopped after the Civil War, but at one point in time, people actually thought things through instead of, hey, this is politically popular right now. This will get me more likes, or followers, or get me reelected, and I can have my vodka delivered to my house by a government vehicle. I'm not saying any politician is using a GSA contract for their vodka.
It's funny. No, it's true though. And I think that's why the Democrats are sort of shaken in their boots right now and terrified of Trump being elected, is because they know the precedents they are setting right now. And they're saying, oh,
they've already said it.
Yeah. And, they're just like, he's going to, weaponize the government and prosecute his political rivals. Like, well, that's exactly what you're doing. And plenty of people are pointing that out to them, but they don't, and they're aware of it. Of course, they're completely aware of it. But they're just not going to admit it publicly. But you're absolutely right. It's precedent. And I think, what would be really fascinating to see and to look into is, when did the states really start giving up their individual authority? Because states individually have a lot of power. And at some point, it's like the state's autonomy was just sort of given to the federal government, right? But the states actually have huge individual powers. And I would really like to see the states start to reclaim that again. And I know there's plenty of people, and especially a lot of women will hate this, but I'm glad they overturned Roe v. Wade. Regardless of my opinion on abortion, it wasn't the court's decision, or it wasn't the court's place to make a law. And that's what they did with Roe v. Wade, right? And so that's why they overturned it. It had nothing to do with them being pro-abortion or pro-life or pro-choice. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that they recognized that the court made a law, and that's not their role in the government. That's not their role. That's not their branch of the government. That's Congress. Only Congress or the state legislature can make laws. And so that's why it was then given back to the states. Each state can decide for themselves what the law will be. And I am so happy to see that, because it's now sort of giving that autonomy back to the states. And I think the states need to embrace that and really like step up and realize the power that each state individually has and embrace it and start implementing that power a little bit more.
I think the one of the turning points happened were the feds really started getting involved is when we started seeing more publicity on certain aspects of everyday life. I think you could even extrapolate it further back to even the civil rights movement, where the feds stepped in. You had U.S. Marshals and National Guard stepping in during desegregation, instead of allowing this to be a state level issue. Now, in that particular case, you had a lot of states who still thought that the Dixie flag flew over the South and were in a certain mindset. And in that case, they were, that was a case by case something. But I don't think that it would have been, it should have lasted as long as it has, because then you started seeing, for instance, back in the late 90s, the Columbine incident. I think that is one of the first times that what's become an all too common event, and still is a very emotional, very hot button item, but you have large scale attacks on schools, especially, but any public place. And you had the term homegrown terrorists starting getting thrown around. And the feds stepped in and started making more and more incursion on how certain things are going to be done on a law enforcement end of things. Then we had 9/11, and everybody's favorite patriotic act of Congress, and a certain former president had led the way on that with what I believe was good intentions.
Yeah, I like George W.
W was probably one of the most entertaining presidents
He
out
was.
there. I mean,
charming. He's very charming.
He got distracted by a cat in the rose garden giving a press release or a press brief. I mean, I can safely say the last couple of presidents we've had since Reagan have been great for entertainment value, which unfortunately is one reason why I think some of them stayed in office. I mean, Clinton and his shenanigans, and then Bush, and then Obama, and then Bush again, and Bush Jr., excuse me, and then Trump, and now our current president and commander in chief,
who can barely walk down.
Oh my Lord! It's pretty sad where South Park made a parody, and they were pretty much on the money in that the whole thing of Mr. Garrison becoming president on a bad joke. It really kind of seems like that's how some of these people are getting elected across the board, is they're so extreme. We've got a congresswoman who's everybody's favorite bartender, and I'm not gonna touch her. She's so cringy.
Oh my God, she's the worst. No, she's one of the worst. I have quite a few who I think are the worst.
But she was safe because of who she was with on one January afternoon, because that city is safe.
Yeah. Is that where she was? Was she in El Paso?
No. She was holed up next to Escobar.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
during
there, but that's who I was thinking.
Yeah, during the incident. Yeah, she was. Everybody's favorite bartender was next to our good friend
Can you
Ronnie.
imagine the two of them that day? Like, oh my God, we're gonna die. I'm like, do you think so? I think we're gonna die. My heart rate.
I honestly think Veronica, honestly think she would have probably was tempted to, if not actually did, slap.
I was thinking the same thing.
It's like, shut up, you stupid, whiny
Love to be a
little,
fly on the wall. Yeah, she's like, settle the fuck down.
right?
Yeah.
Calm your shit.
Yeah.
As she pulls out her razor that we all know she keeps in her purse. Because she's
She
from
is
El
from
Paso.
Texas after all.
But yeah,
She's
she
got to arm
is.
herself, and God love her for it.
Yeah, yep, and that's how she does it.
Yeah.
Because El Paso's safe.
Yeah. Oh, look at this.
It's
Christopher, I agree. The Federalist Papers and anti-Federalist papers should be read by all people. I knew after 9/11 the Patriot Act was bad, and everyone called me anti-American, and I just got out of the service. Oh, that's too bad that you got out of the service. But you're right. It definitely is. It's unconstitutional, not anti-constitutional, though I suppose both would work. It is unconstitutional for sure, but yet they're still doing it.
well, and it's really sad to see. First of all, Christopher, thank you for your service. I too am a vet. I'd served over in the desert. I was I can't talk. Having a VA-induced aneurysm. I was a medic, but being active in the VFW myself at the post and district levels and other places, the one most common thing I've heard over the years is how anti-government our veteran population is after our time in service. And it's a combination of the things we saw during and experienced during our time in service, and then the way our veteran population is treated after service and our families, and especially after 9/11 and all that other stuff. And we had Operation Iraqi Freedom. Okay, I'll address that one later. But in Afghanistan, we had PTSD became such a big issue.
Yeah.
And everybody immediately thought anyone who has PTSD is automatically going to turn randomly violent and whatever. And it's only in recent years that people are starting to understand that, and this is again where we see an influx in the corrections or in the legal system is partially because of a poorly managed veteran care plan on every level, not just the federal, but on the state level and the local level, where veterans are abandoned. They've been abandoned since Vietnam, at least, but if not further back. But you have anyone can have PTSD. One of the best acts I have ever seen came out or finally got passed recently, a number of months ago, and that is what is it? It's the retro. Essentially, it's a retro payment act for veterans who, during their time in service, were subjected to military sexual trauma or sexual assault. And that contributed to the reason why they were discharged from the military or their VA disability with various mental health conditions, including PTSD. And that was military sexual trauma was one of the most closely guarded secrets for decades. That did not happen in the military. It did not happen, especially to males in the military. And to see that we're finally starting to get some traction on a very long-standing, very serious issue that spans every single branch, every single decade, for at least the last 70 years or so, to see that finally getting legitimately looked at and Congress doing things, I think is a drastic help. Because a lot of these people we see in the veterans or in the courts, I mean, heck, veteran treatment court, looking specifically at the veteran population. And a lot of these folks are in there because they're self-medicating. There's no support. They don't trust the agencies that are supposed to be there to help them. They don't have an avenue to go out back in the public and return to normal life. And unfortunately, a lot of the public, once you're a veteran, you're always a veteran. And that could be a good thing. And that could also be a very stigmatizing thing. It's not too dissimilar to the way inmates are treated and post prison time folks are. Oddly enough, the food isn't different. Sometimes prison food is better than military chow. But you're an Air Force brat. I'm sure you don't know what I'm talking about. But
hey, I've had MREs, so.
oh, you did the military Lunchable.
I know. Well, when I was a kid, my dad would go TUI, and he'd come back and he'd always have extras. And I was like, "Oh, what you got?" Like as a kid, it's like, "Ooh, fun."
Oh, I remember. Yeah, my dad was a Marine, so yeah, I remember that was like the biggest thing. And then, my first job in the fire service was I worked for Bureau of Land Management, Wildland Fire Division, and I got real familiar with what MREs were over the summer.
Yeah.
So when I was stuck in a desert eating MREs, it was like, wow, I'm 18 all over again. I got a pre-boot camp induction of
Oh, intergalactic. I got a box of civilian MREs. Yeah, I know. Right now,
those
that's
are
like
all.
prepper, right? Every prepper has the civilian version of MREs.
Yeah, there's a little bit better food in the civilian ones. There's a guy, I'm trying to remember his name. His name's Steve, but he's got a YouTube channel and he does nothing but test MRE, like military rations and everything. Some of them are fascinating. To see what the other countries have.
He tries different countries. Oh, that's
fun. Yeah, different countries, different eras. My favorites are still will always be, and I knew this before his channel, the Italian pink dot and red dot field rations, because the Italians give you a little shot of alcohol.
Oh, nice.
And they designate their menus by colored dots. And so the red dot and the pink dot were the two that had the cordials. Those were pretty high value items downrange.
Yeah.
They still are. North Korea doesn't have MREs, Engler.
They don't?
Everything is rationed. I think the North Korean one was more of a spoof product because I'd seen it before, and yeah, they're still very much bulk.
I was going to say they also haven't left the country, right? They're still just
like everybody. If the North Koreans are building MREs, I think those would be on the grocery store shelves.
Yeah,
I mean the whole country is. I don't know how much longer Little Kim is going to last, but they're even cutting off their allies now. Yeah, they're special.
They are special.
And Chris apparently, I'm gonna, by his statement, I always loved Army chow hall food. You were clearly infantry. You were or
food.
No, they just think it's better because they're used to eating rocks and lizards out in sticks.
Well, that's true. It's all about like perspective, really.
It really is, cooked food versus non-cooked food.
Right. Anything is going to be better than a bug. So
I don't know. I've had some pretty tasty bugs. So yeah, that part of training was pretty interesting. Oh, so you were infantry who can do math. Nice. And yeah, no. Infantry is the queens of battle, sir. The queens of battle are infantry. The kings of battle are the 13 series and field artillery. And yes, I do have my Red Sox and Order of St. Barbara. So
and the rest of us have no idea.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm geeking out over here.
No, it's totally fun. No, you're making friends. I love it.
We're making friends. We're building fans. Remember, like, share, and subscribe, and comment. It helps the logarithms.
It does. It does. The YouTube got
show all your friends.
Yes. Yeah, I'm still figuring out like the thumbs up, like how much that. And also, I just learned this yesterday. Apparently, and this is something I always forget to do. Thank you for saying it. If you say, please subscribe, like, share, hit the thumbs, all that stuff. Like you even say it during the show several times. The YouTube algorithm likes that. I had no idea. No idea. So I
They
gotta
like when you
remember.
sit, YouTube likes your likes, shares, and subscribes statements. Wow. Well, I
Yeah,
definitely
it
think
likes it. So the
everyone
algorithm
here.
now knows that you're saying, because you're now promoting YouTube. So they
Well,
like that and they share you out more. So guys, remind me, because I always forget to say it during the show.
so I see that there are, what is it? How many people in the chat right now? And there's only
Right.
5 likes. 5, really? All of you? I'm disappointed. That's like the
Well,
first
what
thing.
you're seeing is the combination between X and YouTube, because I'm on both right now. I'm streaming on both. So
So
right
all
now,
of
there's
you
not as
on
many
X,
people on YouTube,
all
but
of you
we
on
did
X,
have, at a point in time, we did have more people.
yeah,
Like
but
right now, we have more on X. It goes up and down like throughout the show.
so all of you on X need to jump over to YouTube, like,
Yep.
share, and subscribe. Join if you haven't already. Make
Yeah.
that your habit, because that is actually one of the things I do. I'm not passing judgment. I'm not saying I'm better than you, even though this is just my good habit. Is as soon as I log in to the show, even if I'm not even listening that much to it because I got my assistant is cackling in the office next door.
No, you're always listening to it.
Yeah, is like the first, even if you only watch 2 minutes. She Chris does it a lot. So
Yes.
from he Chris and she Chris, I want to see more likes on this. Otherwise,
Yes.
I'm gonna start calling people out. I really
I
am. The
love
next
it.
time I'm on the
I
show,
love
which will
it.
probably be that'll probably get me like banned. You're probably gonna get all sorts of messages. Dave is probably in the other room, like, Lynn, don't you ever let Chris be on the show ever again.
Oh no, Dave would be like all for it. He'd be like, yes, you need to have Chris on every single show. No, Dave would
I
be
would love to if I could.
You're always welcome.
So
Always.
I've always felt welcome.
Oh,
So
good.
hey, someone. Oh, never mind. I thought it was Chris could count to 15. I'm sorry. It was Angler who can count to 15. I was almost
It's not his fault.
impressed.
He's seeing what's on the streaming screen, and it's two webs. It's two sites. So it's not Chris's
Oh,
fault.
I'm still in the YouTube because I know that also helps the numbers. So
Oh, gotcha. Well, thank
yeah,
you. Yeah, I watch it. I
Yeah.
actually have YouTube. I have that tab open as well, so the channel. But also because StreamYard is funny, like sometimes, especially if somebody does say like a super sticker, I can't see it on StreamYard, so I have to go into YouTube to see it.
Yeah.
Or certain emojis look either like, especially like the people who are members, they have access to, like the members only emojis. Those will just show up like with whatever I named it. So I have one like Eggy Smalls, my chicken, she has an emoji. And so it'll just say Eggy, 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 like every time. It's usually Chris who puts it up. So I can't see them unless I'm like on the YouTube one. So for several reasons, I have it open as well. And sometimes StreamYard is also weird. This is a little side rant here. I'll try and like make a post, and sometimes it's nothing. Like I think when you were talking about the penguin poop, and I said, yeah, they add a lot of nitrogen to the earth. StreamYard will say, oh, you kicked this comment back. It won't let you post it because it must think it's spam. And then I'll go and type the exact same thing on YouTube, like in the chat, and it posts it. So there's weird quirks with StreamYard.
That is some penguin shit right there.
Yeah. It is. You're right. It absolutely is.
Yeah, that was one of those worthless bits of knowledge that I wish I didn't have to learn.
Hilarious.
Is how an entire population of penguins were discovered accidentally.
Really?
From a Google satellite doing Google mapping, and they found streaks of poo in the ice, and biologists were able to go and confirm that was a thriving penguin population in an area that they thought that there was no birds there anymore. So shit happens, and then stuff
I was dealing
like
with
that,
chicken shit
so.
earlier, so I get it. Birds poop a lot. They do.
Yeah, do you free range your chickens, or do you have like chicken tractors? And I'm not, for those who don't know what a chicken tractor is, it's not a little miniature John Deere.
It's not, but that would be amazing. I would love to have that. No, I have a coop and an enclosed run, which I keep them in like at night. And then in the morning, I open up the enclosed run and they have the whole like backyard, which is all like fenced off. So it's like a huge privacy fence, so they can't get out. So during the day, they're all, they have the run of the backyard, but which sometimes means they're also on the back porch. They figured out that the dogs, they're much smarter than I ever thought. Yes. They've watched the dogs, because the dogs obviously go in the backyard too, and the dogs hang out with the chickens. And when the dogs want to come in, they scratch at the door like a dog does. And the chickens have seen the dogs do this, and that they get let in. And every now and then I get like pecks on the back door. And I know it's not the dogs because the dogs are inside. And I'll be like, what in the world? Like when it first started happening, I was like, what is that? Because both the dogs were sitting right next to me. And I go and look, and it's like 3 of the chickens pecking at the door. They're like, where are you?
They are incredibly intelligent.
They're so
in fact, if
They're so
you can use chickens to train other poultry.
Can you?
Turkeys don't, unless they're trained, don't know how to use like a bib waterer.
Yeah.
Chickens, for some reason, do. It's just one of those things. I think it's a pecking thing. So if you're going to have a bib waterer for your turkeys, when you're raising them, you raise them with chickens, and they'll pick up the behavior. So you service chicken right there.
Service chickens. Yes, that's
service chicken.
Chickens. They need to raise chickens.
Down in Angola, they raise all of them. Chickens, cattle, horses. It's pretty.
That's a really cool program. I think that's amazing.
Yeah,
but I think they get attached to you too, like the chickens do. And each of my chickens, like every other animal, like they all have their independent personalities. And like Ozzy, she tends to follow me around a lot. Most of the chickens have musical names. You'll find that out the more I say them. So Ozzy is kind of my buddy. Ozzy, and then we have Dolly and Jolene, but Jolene tends to follow me around more. So I have Jolene and Dolly, or Jolene and Ozzy. And Ozzy's gone a little broody. She's gone a little broody. She's had some moments lately. And those that don't know, that means she just wants to sit on a clutch of eggs, but we don't have a rooster. So she can't hatch eggs. So it's, it takes a toll on their body because they'll stay in there all day. They don't eat as much. They're not getting exercise. So I have to keep like taking her out. And she also takes up one of the nesting boxes because we only have 6 chickens. So we only have 2 nesting boxes, which is usually plenty. But Dolly is in the one that everybody likes. They all always want to go in the same one. And so she's sitting there all day long. So the other chickens are not thrilled. And Ozzy's been cranky. So I took Ozzy out this morning, and I basically let all the other chickens, they were all like yelling at me because Dolly would, or I keep saying Dolly, Ozzy wouldn't get out of the nesting box that they all wanted to go into. So I take Ozzy. Eggy Smalls had already laid her egg. So Eggy and Ozzy and I were out in the backyard, and I put Eggy down, Ozzy. And I was looking at the garden because, it's that time where we're planting their little seedlings. And I hear this like right behind me of like chicken wings, right? And all of a sudden, Ozzy flew up on my shoulder, and I was standing up. And I was like, matey, like, what are you doing, you little weirdo? And she was just like looking around like, this is not bad. And she was just like, I was like, okay. So we went with it, and I was walking around with a chicken on my shoulder for a few minutes this morning, and she wouldn't get down until I kind of like bent over and over and over until she finally was like, boop, had to get off. But they're funny.
Yeah, there's a perfect Halloween costume for you. You can be the inbred pirate there with your chicken on your shoulder and straw pirate hat.
That is hilarious. The redneck pirate. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. That seems like that would have been, if Alan Jackson had lived longer, would have been possibly an album idea.
Oh my God, that's amazing. It's a great album name. Oh my gosh.
Right?
That's great. That's funny. Yeah, she's my only lap chicken. She'll jump up in your lap if you're sitting out there, but It's fun. I hadn't experienced that one before. I was like, well, this is new. Okay. We're going to go with
Yeah.
that.
Never surprised when it comes to livestock.
That's true, but they're fun.
They
But
are.
awesome. Well, thanks, Chris. I've kept you for
No
3
problem.
hours. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to keep you quite so long, but I always have fun chatting with you.
It's my day off. I would have been, God knows, doing what. I would have probably still been watching the show. And, at least
like I said,
it's more entertaining.
More entertaining, to be honest. It is fun, isn't it? Like, it's a lot of fun.
It is. And I think looking at some of the comments, I think I'm not on X right now, so I don't know what they're saying. Probably tell me shut up. But
No,
it
they
looks
don't
like your
chat as
comments.
much.
Okay. But it looks like we've got a couple folks that this was a good thing. So
Awesome.
actually,
Well, like I
there's an
said, you're
idea for you,
welcome
Lynn.
anytime. Just let me know when you
There's
have a day off.
Usually Mondays and Tuesdays are my days off because I'm now on the flex admin schedule. So, I know it. Promotion has its privileges, although
Yes.
I don't think I could do this at work because
No, probably not.
I know for a fact we would get bombed by at least one of the folks at my station, including my assistant. Because
You're like, hey.
The other day I was replaying one of the shows, and she comes into my office. She's like, "Is that Lynn woman that you know?"
That's awesome.
So I told her, I'm like, you can log on
That's
and
true.
contribute yourself. You can, but then I got to thinking, I'm like, no, because then she'll start telling stories about me, and
Right. Keep that separate.
it's
That's so funny. Oh, that's awesome.
follow and contribute. Just don't mention me.
Right. That's that's awesome. I love it.
It's been a blast. We need to do this more often.
Yes, I would love it. So, like I said, anytime we'll plan it again. It'll be a lot of fun. And like I said, you're always welcome. You know that. So I'm trying to figure out. I'm sort of changing things up a little bit. I think I might do some pre-recorded videos too, but I don't know.
Okay.
We're trying to figure out exactly what I'm going to do. But I still want to do live ones too because they're fun. I
They
like doing
are.
the live.
They really are.
But I think I might be able to be like a little more picky with some of the hearings. Find some really good ones. So like this one was really good. I liked this one quite a lot. So hopefully everybody else did as well. But we will definitely do it again. Everybody, don't worry. You will see Chris back on here again with me. And you've got some things in the works too. So when you get those squared away, we'll let everybody know about those too, because it sounds really interesting and I can't wait for it. It's going to be a blast. But we'll keep them in suspense and until you know for sure what you're doing. And so I think that's it. Well, thank you so much, Chris. This was awesome. I always have fun.
Definitely.
And so glad that you were here and we got a chance to hang out. It's been a while since we've gotten to hang out. So
it has been. I'm going to have to fly out to Ohio. You're going to have to come out to Texas for some tacos and hang out for serious.
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
That would be fun.
We can go. I can go show you where Veronica lives.
And, oh my gosh, it would just be my dream day.
Right. And
Veronica, what else could we want?
Right. And I'm not, never mind. I'm going to get myself in trouble if I talk about her gardener being illegal again. I'm sure he has his papers.
Right. Sure he has his work permits. If not, I'm sure she can pull some strings. So,
some skirts. Yeah, she does skirt around a lot,
Yeah.
And she does get on those edges of the rules. But she's great. She's awesome.
It's the safest place in the world. Why? Because it's on the border.
And it's about to be safer if Brandon Herrera and whatnot. I heard he was running for office, and I thought, oh my God, let's go, Brandon. This is a chance to redeem the phrase.
Yeah.
But And actually, it's on his election poster. It's on his candidacy posters. It's hilarious.
Oh, is it? That's awesome.
Yes,
I
yes.
love
Just
it.
I'll look it up. I almost made it my avatar today, but I'm like, no, I can't be political. I can't endorse any candidate one way or another. I can slam them all I want, but
Yeah. You can endorse whomever you want. It's
well,
your life.
that's true. That's
You
true.
know?
However, the slippery slope with that is you either endorse them all or you get branded on one side or the other, and then you end up having to play that game of favorite children. So they're
Well,
all
then
my favorites.
they need to work harder to become your favorites. That's all. That's how I
Exactly.
see it.
Oh, that's so messed up. I hope no one in here has ever had their parent tell them that.
Has never had their what?
Has ever had their parent tell them that. Well, I guess you need to work harder to be my favorite child.
That's right. I told my kids that weekly. No, I didn't.
It explains so much. It explains
Yeah.
so much.
They used to be
why
like,
their
you like the
pictures,
cat better than us. I was like, sometimes I do. But
my better half, she regularly teases me that the cat has more priority than she does. And I'm like,
I get it. I get it.
You're going to take it up the cat. The dog would equally lodge a complaint.
Yeah.
It's speaking of which, it's almost time for. Oh, never mind. He's knocked out on the couch. But yeah, it's been great.
Yes, it
Awesome.
has. We will definitely do it again. No worries, everybody. You will see Chris again. And thank you again, Chris, for being here with us. It was a lot of fun.
Definitely.
And with that, guys, I'm going to take Chris off. So thanks, Chris. Bye.
Thanks, Lynn.
And with that, I am going to who do we have? I think we got just Eggy Smalls today. Let Eggy take you out, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Scatteringly as the days go, dragging us along like rag dolls. Make these moments move faster. It's our latest disaster. There's no place I'd rather be anyway. This will do for a while. Gather your thoughts so we can run away from it all and ease our minds. We'll try to make it all matter, pave the way for the shattering of youth. Promise our real lives not far behind. Leave nothing to chance and we will not find. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Try to make it all matter, pave the way for the shattering of youth. Promise our real lives not far behind. Leave nothing to chance and we will not find. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Scatteringly is the the days go, dragging us along.